You've been misled about what it means to stay strong. They told you strength means controlling everything, fixing every problem, and winning every battle. But if that were true, why do people feel shattered the moment life turns against them? Why do so many collapse when plans fail, when relationships break, when uncertainty arrives? The truth is that staying unshaken has nothing to do with controlling the world. It has everything to do with mastering the mind. And Buddhist wisdom has been teaching this for thousands of years. Life will test you, gain and loss, praise and criticism, success and failure, calm days and unexpected storms. These movements are part of being human. Yet most people spend their lives trying to escape them, fighting change, resisting uncertainty, and fearing what they cannot control. And that is why the mind becomes restless, unstable, and exhausted. But Buddhist teachings reveal something different. Inner stability is not created by forcing life to behave the way you want. It is created by developing a mind that remains steady even while the world keeps changing. The kind of mind that does not collapse when problems appear. The kind of awareness that remains calm even when everything around it feels uncertain. The Buddha discovered that peace does not come from perfect circumstances. It comes from understanding how the mind reacts to circumstances. When this understanding begins to grow, something remarkable happens. The emotional storms that once felt overwhelming begin to lose their power. Worries that once controlled your thoughts start to fade, like clouds drifting across a quiet sky. Tonight, as you listen to these lessons, something subtle will begin to shift. The noise in your mind will start to slow. The weight of constant thinking will begin to soften. The tension of trying to control everything will slowly loosen. And in its place, a deeper stability will begin to appear. A calm that does not depend on praise or success. A strength that remains steady through uncertainty. A quiet, inner balance that allows you to walk through life without being shaken by every difficulty that appears. This is not just another audio to fall asleep to. This is a journey into the art of staying unshaken when life tests you. A journey into the timeless wisdom of Buddhism and the discovery of the inner stability that has always been within you. Are you ready? Let's begin. But before a mind becomes unshaken, it must first understand something most people spend their entire lives overlooking. The world will never stop moving. Circumstances will rise and fall. Some days life hands you success, recognition, comfort. Other days it brings confusion, loss, and uncertainty. Most people are carried up and down by these waves without even realizing it. When things go well, they feel powerful. When things fall apart, they feel broken. And this is where the deeper training of the mind begins. Because true stability is not built on what happens around you. It is built on what remains steady inside you, even when everything outside changes. A quiet question begins to appear in the mind. If life keeps shifting, what can possibly stay still? That is where the first lesson begins. A strange thing happens when life suddenly changes direction. One moment a person feels secure, confident, certain about who they are. The next moment something shifts. A plan collapses. A relationship ends. A career takes an unexpected turn, and suddenly the ground beneath their identity begins to move. Most people believe they are stable until life tests them. Stability feels real when things are working. When success arrives, confidence rises easily. When praise appears, self-worth feels natural. When goals are achieved, identity feels strong. But the moment those things disappear, the mind begins to wobble. This is because many people unknowingly tie their sense of self to outcomes. Achievements become proof of worth. Recognition becomes proof of value. Progress becomes proof that life is moving correctly. At first, this connection feels motivating. Society encourages it constantly. From a young age, people are taught to measure themselves through grades, titles, income, accomplishments, reputation. The world quietly whispers the same message again and again. You are what you achieve, so the mind builds its identity around results. When results appear, the mind feels stable. When results vanish, the mind feels threatened. This is why emotional turbulence often follows moments of loss or change. It is not only the situation that hurts, it is the collapse of the identity built around that situation. Buddhist wisdom noticed this pattern thousands of years ago. The Buddha observed that human suffering often comes from attaching identity to things that are constantly changing. Wealth changes, health changes, relationships change, status changes. Even the roles people play throughout life shift again and again. When the mind builds its foundation on these unstable elements, emotional security becomes fragile. It is like trying to build a house on moving sand. When life remains calm, the structure appears strong. But when the winds of change arrive, cracks begin to appear everywhere. The Buddhist solution to this problem is surprisingly simple yet deeply transformative. Instead of anchoring identity to external circumstances, the mind learns to anchor itself in awareness. Awareness is different from achievement. Awareness does not depend on praise or success. It is simply the ability to observe life as it unfolds. When someone becomes rooted in awareness, their sense of self stops depending on what happens around them. Success can arrive without creating arrogance. Failure can appear without destroying confidence. Praise can be heard without becoming addictive. Criticism can be received without collapsing self-worth. This internal anchor becomes one of the most powerful forms of emotional stability a human being can develop. Think about how a ship behaves during a storm. When the waters become violent, the ship does not try to control the ocean. It cannot command the waves to calm down. Instead, it relies on its anchor. The anchor connects the ship to something deeper than the surface movement. The waves continue rising and falling, but the ship remains steady. The human mind often forgets this principle. Instead of anchoring inward, it tries to control the waves themselves. People try to control outcomes. They try to control other people's opinions. They try to control how events unfold. They try to control the timing of success, the direction of relationships, the certainty of the future. But life refuses to obey those demands. The waves continue. Buddhist training shifts the focus away from controlling life towards stabilizing the mind within life. The first step is recognizing how easily identity attaches itself to external things. A person may say, "I am successful." But what happens if that success disappears? Does the self disappear with it? Someone may say, "I am respected." But what happens when criticism arrives? Does the self suddenly shrink? Another person may say, "I am loved." But what happens when relationships change? Does the sense of worth dissolve? When identity is attached to outcomes, the mind becomes emotionally dependent on circumstances that are constantly changing. This is why people often experience dramatic emotional swings. When events align with expectations, happiness rises quickly. When life moves in another direction, anxiety and frustration follow. The mind begins living like a pendulum, up during gain, down during loss, excited during praise, disturbed during blame. But Buddhist teachings offer another possibility. Instead of living as the pendulum, the mind can become the still point at the center. This shift happens through the cultivation of awareness. Awareness means noticing thoughts, emotions, and experiences without immediately turning them into identity. When a thought appears, awareness sees it. When an emotion arises, awareness observes it. When success happens, awareness registers the event without attaching self-worth to it. This ability creates space between experience and identity. For example, instead of thinking, "I am a failure," the mind begins noticing a feeling of disappointment is present. Instead of believing, "I am superior because I succeeded," the mind recognizes a moment of success has occurred. The difference may seem small, but it transforms emotional stability completely. Experiences become events passing through awareness rather than definitions of the self. The self becomes the observer rather than the result. When this shift deepens, emotional turbulence begins to lose its intensity. Success becomes enjoyable but not addictive. Failure becomes informative but not devastating. Praise becomes pleasant but not necessary. Criticism becomes something to examine rather than something to fear. The mind stops swinging violently with every external change. This is the beginning of the inner anchor. Another important insight appears when awareness grows stronger. People begin noticing that life has always been unpredictable. No one has ever controlled the full course of events. Every life story includes unexpected turns. Yet despite this uncertainty, awareness itself remains constant. The thoughts change. The circumstances change. The emotions change. But the ability to observe them remains steady. Buddhist meditation practices focus heavily on strengthening this observing awareness. When someone sits quietly and watches the breath, something simple yet profound begins happening. The mind notices how thoughts appear and disappear. Emotions rise and fall. Sensations shift moment by moment. Gradually, a realization forms. Everything inside the mind moves like clouds across the sky, but awareness itself remains like the sky. The clouds may be dark or bright, fast or slow, gentle or stormy, but the sky does not become damaged by the clouds passing through it. When people begin identifying with awareness instead of with every passing thought or event, emotional stability deepens naturally. Life's storms still appear. Difficult moments still happen, but they no longer feel like threats to identity. They become experiences moving across the landscape of awareness. Another beautiful effect appears when this inner anchor grows stronger. Fear begins to soften. Much of human fear comes from the belief that certain outcomes must happen for life to feel safe. The mind clings to specific expectations about how things should unfold. But when identity becomes rooted in awareness instead of outcomes, those expectations loosen. Life no longer needs to follow a perfect script for peace to exist. The mind becomes flexible, adaptable, able to move with changing conditions rather than fighting them. This flexibility is not weakness. It is strength of the highest kind, because a mind anchored in awareness cannot easily be shaken by external events. Loss does not erase identity. Success does not inflate identity. Change does not threaten identity. The anchor holds. Over time, this internal stability creates a quiet confidence that does not depend on circumstances. It becomes easier to walk through uncertain situations without panic. Difficult conversations no longer trigger the same emotional storms. Unexpected events feel manageable rather than overwhelming. The mind develops trust in its own ability to remain steady. This is the discipline of the inner anchor, and like any discipline, it strengthens through practice. Each moment of awareness reinforces it. Each time the mind observes an emotion instead of becoming it, the anchor deepens. Each time life shifts direction and the mind remains calm, the anchor grows stronger. Gradually, the person discovers something remarkable. The world may continue moving in unpredictable ways, but inside, there is something that does not move, a quiet center, a place of stillness beneath the waves. And once this inner anchor becomes stable, the storms of life lose much of their power. Because no matter how wildly circumstances swing between gain and loss, the mind has finally discovered where true stability lives. Once the mind discovers the inner anchor, something interesting begins to happen. The world may still create waves, but those waves no longer drag the mind in every direction. A person begins to notice that many disturbances are not as powerful as they once seemed. Words that once triggered anger lose their grip. Situations that once demanded immediate response begin to look different when seen from the stability of awareness. And this realization quietly leads to the next lesson. Because one of the most misunderstood ideas about strength is the belief that power means reacting quickly. Many people grow up thinking that if someone challenges them, they must respond immediately. If someone criticizes them, they must defend themselves instantly. If something unfair happens, they must strike back with equal force. Society often celebrates the loud response, the quick comeback, the dramatic reaction. But Buddhist wisdom points toward a very different form of power. A moment of silence can hold more strength than 1,000 reactions. Something subtle happens inside the mind when a disturbance appears. It might be a harsh comment, an unfair accusation, a frustrating situation, or a moment when someone tries to provoke anger. The mind feels a sudden surge of energy. Thoughts begin racing. Emotions rise quickly. The body tightens. Words begin forming even before the person is fully aware of what is happening. This surge feels almost automatic. It is as if the mind has a built-in reflex that pushes it to react. For most people, this reflex has been strengthened for years. Every time someone reacts instantly to anger, frustration, or insult, the habit grows stronger. Eventually, the reaction becomes so quick that it feels impossible to pause. But Buddhism teaches that between the disturbance and the reaction, there is always a small space. Most people move through that space too quickly to notice it. The emotion rises, the words come out, and the reaction happens almost in the same moment. Yet, when awareness becomes stronger, that space begins to expand. A person starts noticing the moment before the reaction forms. The emotion appears, but instead of instantly acting on it, the mind becomes curious about it. Instead of becoming the anger, the mind sees the anger. This small pause may last only a few seconds, but within those seconds lies enormous psychological power. Because when the mind pauses, it breaks the automatic chain of reaction. Without this pause, emotions control behavior. Words come out that cannot be taken back. Decisions are made in moments of heat that later create regret. Conflicts grow larger because both sides react without reflection. But when the pause appears, something remarkable changes. The emotion is still present, but it no longer has complete control. It becomes something the mind can observe instead of something that commands immediate action. This is the quiet strength of non-reaction. Non-reaction does not mean suppressing feelings. It does not mean pretending that anger, frustration, or disappointment do not exist. Emotions are natural movements of the human mind. Trying to eliminate them completely would be unrealistic. Non-reaction means allowing the emotion to arise without instantly expressing it through words or behavior. It means letting the emotional wave pass through awareness before deciding what response is truly necessary. Many conflicts in life are not created by the original problem. They are created by the chain of reactions that follow it. One person says something careless, another reacts with anger. The first person reacts again with defensiveness. Soon both minds are trapped in a cycle where each reaction fuels the next. But when one person pauses, the chain breaks. This is why non-reaction dissolves emotional storms. Storms require wind to continue growing. In the same way, emotional conflicts require reactions to keep expanding. When someone refuses to feed the storm with immediate response, the emotional energy begins to fade on its own. This does not mean the person becomes passive or weak. In fact, the opposite is true. Restraint requires far more strength than reaction. Reacting quickly is easy because it follows instinct. Restraining a reaction requires awareness, discipline, and emotional maturity. It requires the ability to observe the rising emotion without becoming controlled by it. Many people mistake loudness for strength. They believe that the person who reacts first is the one who holds power in the situation. But when someone remains calm while others react emotionally, something interesting happens. The emotional balance of the situation begins to shift. The reactive person often loses clarity because their mind is overwhelmed by emotion. The calm person retains clarity because their awareness remains steady. Clarity becomes a powerful advantage. A calm mind can see the situation more accurately. It can choose responses carefully rather than acting impulsively. It can recognize when silence is more effective than argument. This ability transforms the entire nature of conflict. Instead of becoming trapped inside emotional chaos, the calm mind remains outside it. Many Buddhist teachers describe this as stepping out of the fire. When anger spreads through a conversation, reacting emotionally is like throwing more wood into the flames. But stepping back allows the fire to burn itself out. One of the reasons non-reaction is so powerful is that it removes the reward many people unconsciously seek when they provoke others. Sometimes people create disturbances specifically to trigger reactions. A reaction gives them attention. It confirms their ability to influence someone else's emotions. But when the reaction does not come, the disturbance loses its purpose. The emotional energy they expected simply disappears into silence. This does not mean that silence is always the final answer. Sometimes a response is necessary. Boundaries must still be communicated. Truth must still be spoken. Injustice must still be addressed. But when those responses come from calm awareness rather than immediate emotion, their power becomes much greater. Words spoken from emotional clarity carry far more weight than words spoken in anger. Another interesting transformation appears when non-reaction becomes a habit. The mind begins to experience fewer internal storms. At first, the practice focuses on external disturbances. Someone says something upsetting, a frustrating event occurs, a stressful moment appears. The person pauses instead of reacting. But over time, the same principle begins to apply to internal disturbances as well. Thoughts themselves can create emotional storms. The mind may replay past mistakes, imagine future problems, or create stories about what others might be thinking. These thoughts often trigger emotional reactions, even when nothing external is happening. But the same pause can be applied here too. When a stressful thought appears, awareness can observe it without instantly believing it. The mind notices the thought, but instead of reacting with worry or frustration, it allows the thought to pass. This creates a surprising sense of freedom. Many of the emotional storms people experience are not caused by real events happening in the present moment. They are caused by the mind reacting to its own thoughts. Non-reaction interrupts this pattern. Thoughts continue appearing, but they no longer trigger automatic emotional responses. They become like clouds drifting through the sky of awareness. Some clouds are dark, some are light, some move quickly, some linger for a while, but the sky itself remains undisturbed. This is the deeper layer of non-reaction. The mind no longer needs to chase every thought or fight every emotion. It simply observes them as temporary movements. With practice, this creates a deep sense of inner stability. External disturbances lose much of their power. Internal thoughts lose much of their influence. The mind becomes quieter, clearer, more spacious. People who develop this quiet strength often appear mysterious to others. In situations where most people become upset, they remain calm. In moments where others rush to defend themselves, they pause. When someone tries to provoke them, their response is measured rather than explosive. This calmness is not coldness, it is awareness in action. It reflects a mind that understands something most people overlook. Not every disturbance deserves a reaction. Many emotional battles disappear simply by refusing to fight them. Life offers countless moments where the mind is invited into conflict. Someone disagrees, someone criticizes, someone behaves unfairly. Circumstances become frustrating. Each moment presents a choice: react immediately and fuel the storm, or pause and let the storm lose its strength. The second choice requires discipline, but the rewards are immense. Energy that would have been spent on emotional conflict becomes available for clarity, creativity, and peace. Relationships become healthier because fewer conversations are driven by uncontrolled emotion. The mind becomes stronger because it no longer depends on reaction to feel powerful. Over time, the pause becomes natural. What once required effort becomes a habit. Disturbances appear, awareness notices them, and the mind remains steady. The emotional storms still exist in the world, but they no longer sweep the mind away. The person becomes like a mountain standing quietly beneath passing clouds. Wind may move across its surface, rain may fall, storms may arrive and depart. But the mountain itself does not move, and from that stillness, the true strength of non-reaction continues to grow. And when a person begins to understand the quiet strength of non-reaction, another discovery slowly appears. Remaining calm when others try to provoke you is one kind of stability. But there is another, deeper challenge that happens in complete silence. It appears when nothing dramatic is happening on the outside, yet the mind itself begins to move restlessly on the inside. Because sometimes the greatest disturbances do not come from other people. They come from the mind trying to escape discomfort. There are moments in life when everything becomes uncertain. A difficult decision has not yet been made. A problem has not yet been solved. A conversation has not yet happened. The future feels unclear. Nothing terrible has happened yet, but the mind feels uneasy because it cannot see what will happen next. In these moments, something very interesting happens. The mind begins to run, not physically but mentally. Thoughts start racing through possible scenarios. What if this goes wrong? What if things get worse? What if the plan fails? What if people react badly? What if the outcome is not what was expected? Suddenly the mind is moving through dozens of imagined futures in only a few minutes. This movement feels like action. It feels like problem solving. It feels like preparation. But most of the time it is simply the mind trying to escape uncertainty. Human beings have a deep instinct to seek psychological safety. The brain prefers clear answers, predictable outcomes, and stable conditions. When those things are missing, the mind begins searching desperately for something to hold on to. It begins creating plans, predictions, and worries in an attempt to regain control. But Buddhist teachings offer a surprising insight. Running mentally does not create stability. It creates exhaustion. Many people spend enormous amounts of energy trying to escape the feeling of uncertainty. They replay conversations in their heads. They analyze every possible outcome. They distract themselves with constant activity. They fill their time with endless stimulation just to avoid sitting quietly with uncomfortable thoughts. The mind becomes busy not because busyness solves the problem, but because stillness feels frightening. When the mind becomes quiet, uncertainty becomes visible. And the mind does not like looking at what it cannot control. This is why distraction has become one of the most common habits of modern life. Whenever discomfort appears, the mind quickly reaches for something to escape into. A phone screen, endless scrolling, constant planning, continuous thinking. The mind would rather move endlessly than sit still with uncertainty. But Buddhist wisdom invites a different response. Instead of running away from discomfort, the mind learns to stand still. Standing still does not mean ignoring problems. It does not mean pretending that uncertainty does not exist. It means remaining mentally present with the feeling of uncertainty without immediately trying to escape it. This simple shift requires tremendous courage, because when the mind stops running, it must face the moment exactly as it is. There may be unanswered questions. There may be emotions that feel uncomfortable. There may be situations that have no immediate solution. Standing still means allowing those realities to exist without trying to control them immediately. At first, this feels unfamiliar. The mind may protest. Thoughts may try to pull attention back into planning, worrying, or distraction. The urge to escape can feel very strong. But something remarkable begins to happen when the mind gently resists that urge. The discomfort begins to soften, not because the situation has changed, but because the mind is no longer fighting against the experience of uncertainty. Much of the suffering people experience during uncertain moments does not come from the situation itself. It comes from the resistance to that situation. When the mind insists that uncertainty must disappear immediately, tension grows, anxiety rises, thoughts begin racing faster, the body tightens. But when the mind accepts that uncertainty is simply part of the present moment, the pressure begins to release. Uncertainty becomes something that can be experienced rather than something that must be eliminated instantly. This is one of the most powerful forms of psychological stability. Remaining present with discomfort without escaping it. Buddhist meditation practices often train this ability through very simple exercises. A person may sit quietly and focus on the breath. At first, this seems almost too simple to matter. Breathing happens naturally all the time. Why would observing it be important? But when someone sits with the breath for even a few minutes, they begin to notice something interesting. The mind constantly tries to leave the present moment. Thoughts appear about the future. Memories arise from the past. Plans begin forming. Worries start developing. Each thought is like a small invitation to mentally run away from the current moment. The practice is simply to notice that movement and gently return attention to the breath. Again and again, this training strengthens the mind's ability to remain present even when discomfort appears. Over time, the person learns something very valuable. Uncertainty can be experienced without panic. Difficult emotions can exist without needing immediate escape. Questions can remain unanswered for a while without destroying inner stability. The mind becomes more spacious. Instead of reacting to every uncomfortable sensation with avoidance, it develops the ability to observe those sensations calmly. This calm observation often leads to surprising clarity. When the mind stops running in every direction, it begins to see situations more clearly. Solutions sometimes appear naturally once the mental noise settles. But even when solutions do not appear immediately, the mind no longer feels overwhelmed. It becomes capable of holding uncertainty without collapsing into anxiety. Another important transformation happens when someone practices standing still during mental discomfort. Patience begins to grow. In a world that constantly demands quick answers and fast results, patience has become rare. Many people expect immediate clarity about every problem. When answers do not appear quickly, frustration grows. But life rarely moves according to human timelines. Some situations require time to unfold. Some decisions become clearer only after experience reveals more information. Some emotional wounds need space to heal gradually. When the mind constantly runs ahead, searching for immediate certainty, it creates unnecessary pressure. Standing still allows time to play its natural role. Patience becomes a quiet companion. The mind learns that it does not need to solve every question instantly. Sometimes the wisest response is simply remaining present while the situation continues unfolding. Another benefit of this practice is emotional resilience. When people always escape discomfort, their tolerance for difficulty becomes very small. Even minor uncertainty can feel overwhelming because the mind has never learned how to sit with it. But when someone regularly practices remaining present during uncomfortable moments, their emotional capacity expands. Situations that once felt unbearable become manageable. This does not mean that uncertainty suddenly becomes enjoyable. It simply loses its ability to destabilize the mind. The person begins trusting their ability to remain steady even when answers are unclear. This trust becomes a powerful source of inner confidence, not the loud confidence that depends on success or recognition, but a quiet confidence that grows from experience. The experience of surviving uncertainty without falling apart. Over time, the mind begins realizing something important. Running away mentally does not protect stability. Standing still strengthens it. When uncertainty appears, the mind no longer feels the urgent need to escape. Instead, it recognizes the moment as an opportunity to deepen awareness, a chance to practice presence, a chance to strengthen the calm center that exists beneath the restless movement of thoughts. Life will always include moments where the future is unclear. Plans will not always work perfectly. Situations will not always provide immediate answers. But a mind trained to stand still no longer fears these moments. It sees them as part of the natural rhythm of existence. The waves of uncertainty continue rising and falling, but the mind remains grounded beneath them. And with each moment of staying present instead of running away, the foundation of inner stability becomes stronger. And as the mind becomes more comfortable standing still in the presence of uncertainty, another subtle discovery begins to reveal itself. When the mind stops running away from discomfort, it begins to see something that was always happening but rarely noticed. Emotions rise and fall constantly, like movements in the sky. A feeling appears, grows stronger for a moment, and then slowly fades away. Yet most people experience emotions very differently. Instead of seeing them as temporary experiences, they absorb them into their identity. The moment anger appears, the mind says, "I am angry." When fear arises, the mind says, "I am afraid." When sadness arrives, the mind concludes, "I am broken." In that small shift of language, something powerful happens. The emotion stops being a passing experience and becomes a definition of the self. And this is where emotional turbulence quietly begins. A strange habit exists inside the human mind. Whenever a strong emotion appears, the mind tries to claim ownership of it. Instead of recognizing the emotion as a temporary event, it treats the emotion as part of the identity. The mind becomes the anger, becomes the fear, becomes the sadness. This fusion between emotion and identity is one of the most powerful sources of emotional instability. Because when an emotion becomes part of the self, the mind begins acting as if that emotion must control behavior. Buddhist teachings offer a very different perspective. Instead of saying, "I am angry," the practice invites a simple shift. Anger is present. Instead of saying, "I am afraid," the mind learns to observe that fear is arising. This change may appear small, but it transforms the entire relationship with emotion. When anger becomes something that is happening rather than something that defines the self, the mind gains space. The emotion is still felt, but it no longer commands identity. This understanding begins with a simple observation. Emotions are not permanent. They arrive, stay for a period of time, and eventually dissolve. Sometimes they last minutes, sometimes hours, occasionally longer. But they never remain unchanged forever. They move through the mind like weather moving through the sky. Storms may appear suddenly, but eventually the clouds shift and the sky becomes clear again. Yet most people treat emotional storms as if they will last forever. When anger appears, the mind behaves as though anger will define the entire day. When sadness appears, the mind assumes it will control everything that follows. This assumption creates additional suffering. The mind begins reacting not only to the emotion itself, but also to the belief that the emotion will continue indefinitely. Buddhist mindfulness dissolves this illusion by carefully observing emotional movement. When a person sits quietly and notices their inner experience, they begin seeing something remarkable. Emotions behave exactly like weather patterns. They rise gradually, sometimes with intensity, then slowly weaken before disappearing. The mind can observe this process with calm attention. During this observation, another realization appears. The mind itself is not the emotion. The mind is the space in which the emotion appears. Just as the sky is not the storm, awareness is not the emotion. Awareness simply witnesses the storm passing through. This realization weakens the habit of emotional ownership. When anger appears, the mind no longer needs to declare, "This is me." Instead, it can say, "This is a temporary experience moving through awareness." The difference may sound subtle, but its effect is profound. Emotional identification begins to loosen. Many emotional problems grow stronger because people believe every feeling must be expressed immediately or acted upon. If anger appears, the mind feels compelled to speak harshly. If fear appears, the mind withdraws or avoids. If sadness appears, the mind becomes trapped in heavy thoughts. But when emotions are seen as temporary events rather than commands, behavior becomes more flexible. A person may feel anger without acting aggressively. Fear may appear without forcing avoidance. Sadness may arise without turning into despair. The emotion is acknowledged, but it does not control the direction of behavior. This ability creates extraordinary stability during emotional storms. Instead of being pulled in every direction by temporary feelings, the mind remains centered in awareness. Emotions continue to appear, but they no longer define identity or dictate action. Another important insight emerges when someone practices observing emotions without ownership. Many emotions become stronger when the mind resists them. When anger arises, the mind may try to push it away. When sadness appears, the mind may judge itself for feeling weak. When fear emerges, the mind may criticize itself for lacking courage. These reactions add another layer of emotional tension. Mindfulness introduces a different approach. Instead of resisting or judging emotions, the mind simply allows them to exist for a while. This gentle acceptance removes the pressure created by resistance. When emotions are allowed to move naturally, they often pass more quickly. The process becomes similar to watching waves in the ocean. Some waves are small, others larger, but none of them remain forever. They rise, break, and dissolve back into the water. Observing this movement without interference allows the natural rhythm to continue. Emotions behave in much the same way. They rise from various causes, sometimes external events, sometimes internal thoughts. But once the conditions that created them change, the emotion gradually fades. The mind's role is not to force the wave to disappear. The mind's role is simply to remain present while the wave moves through. This perspective changes the way people relate to difficult emotions. Instead of fearing them, they become curious about them. Curiosity replaces resistance. The mind begins exploring how emotions arise, how they feel within the body, how they change over time. During this observation, the mind may notice that emotions often begin as physical sensations. Anger may appear as heat in the chest or tension in the jaw. Fear may appear as tightness in the stomach or rapid breathing. Sadness may appear as heaviness behind the eyes or a slowing of energy. When awareness gently observes these sensations without labeling them as identity, the emotional experience becomes easier to hold. The mind stops creating dramatic stories about the feeling and simply watches the physical sensations evolve. This quiet observation reduces the emotional amplification that usually occurs when the mind becomes entangled in interpretation. Instead of thinking endlessly about why the emotion appeared or what it might mean, awareness simply witnesses the feeling itself. Over time, this practice develops emotional intelligence at a deep level. The mind becomes skilled at recognizing emotions early, before they grow into overwhelming storms. Because emotions are observed as temporary events, the mind becomes less reactive and more balanced. This balance also prevents temporary feelings from controlling long-term decisions. Many regrets in life arise when people act impulsively during emotional moments. Words spoken in anger damage relationships. Decisions made in fear limit opportunities. Reactions driven by temporary sadness create unnecessary consequences. But when emotions are seen as passing weather patterns, the mind learns patience. It recognizes that the feeling present now may not reflect reality clearly. Waiting for emotional clarity often leads to wiser responses. Another beautiful effect of this practice is the development of compassion toward oneself. When emotions are no longer treated as identity, the mind becomes less judgmental about experiencing them. Anger does not mean someone is a bad person. Fear does not mean someone is weak. Sadness does not mean someone is broken. Emotions become natural expressions of the human experience. They arise when conditions produce them and disappear when conditions change. This understanding softens the harsh self-criticism many people carry. Instead of blaming themselves for emotional experiences, they simply observe them with kindness. Kindness toward one's own mind becomes an important part of emotional stability. Just as weather cannot be controlled, emotions cannot always be prevented, but they can be understood. And understanding brings freedom. Freedom from the belief that emotions define identity. Freedom from the urge to react immediately. freedom from the fear that uncomfortable feelings will last forever. As this freedom grows, the mind becomes increasingly calm. Emotional waves continue appearing, but they no longer feel threatening. The person becomes like a quiet observer sitting beside a river, watching the current flow without being pulled into it. Life continues presenting situations that trigger emotions: joy, frustration, excitement, disappointment, love, grief. All of them move through the landscape of awareness. But the center of the mind remains steady. This steady center is what Buddhist teachings point toward when they speak about liberation from suffering. Not the elimination of emotion, but the understanding of its temporary nature. When emotions are allowed to pass without ownership, the mind stops building identity around temporary experiences. And slowly, gently, a deeper stability begins to appear. And when the mind begins to see emotions as passing weather rather than permanent identity, something deeper quietly reveals itself. The waves of anger, fear, sadness, and joy no longer feel like permanent structures inside the mind. They appear, move through awareness, and fade. This simple observation begins to loosen the mind's grip on the idea that anything must stay exactly as it is. But this realization slowly leads to a much larger truth. Because emotions are not the only things that move through life, everything moves. A strange discomfort appears in the human heart whenever life changes direction. Something that once felt stable begins to shift. A relationship that once felt permanent begins to evolve. A job that once felt secure becomes uncertain. Health changes, environments change, priorities change, people change. In those moments, the mind often feels shocked. The shock does not come only from the event itself. It comes from the quiet expectation that things should have stayed the same. The mind builds a hidden agreement with life, an agreement that says, "This should continue the way it has always been." When that agreement breaks, the emotional reaction can feel overwhelming. Yet Buddhist philosophy points to a simple truth that most people spend years resisting. Nothing was ever meant to stay the same. Impermanence is not a problem in life. It is the structure of life itself. Everything that exists is constantly changing form. The body ages, seasons shift, relationships evolve, cities transform, technology advances. Even the thoughts inside the mind never remain still. This movement is happening at every moment, even when it is not obvious. But the mind often refuses to see it clearly. It prefers the illusion of permanence. It prefers to believe that success will remain stable, that comfort will continue indefinitely, that relationships will always stay the same, that the present moment can be preserved exactly as it is. When life inevitably changes, the illusion collapses. This is where emotional shock appears. Shock is not created by change alone. Shock appears when change collides with the belief that things should not change. Buddhist teachings offer a different way of relating to this reality. Instead of trying to create stability by forcing life to remain predictable, the mind learns to build stability by accepting the unpredictable nature of existence. This shift may sound paradoxical at first. Most people believe stability means making life secure, controlled, and consistent. They try to organize every part of their lives in ways that reduce uncertainty. Plans are made, expectations are formed, routines are established. There is nothing wrong with planning. But problems arise when the mind expects life to obey those plans completely, because life has never promised such obedience. Buddhist wisdom does not suggest abandoning responsibility or structure. Instead, it teaches something far more powerful. True stability is not found in controlling life's movement. It is found in understanding life's movement. When the mind deeply accepts that everything is temporary, something remarkable happens. Change stops feeling like an attack. It becomes a natural rhythm. The same way a person does not panic when the sun sets in the evening, the mind begins to see other changes as part of the natural cycle of existence. The sunset is not a failure of daylight. It is simply the continuation of the day's journey. In the same way, endings in life are not always disasters. Many of them are simply transitions that make space for something new. But the mind struggles with this perspective because it attaches emotional meaning to stability. Familiar situations feel safe. Predictable routines feel comforting. When those patterns change, the mind interprets the shift as danger. The body even reacts physically. The heart rate increases. Thoughts begin racing. The mind starts searching for explanations or solutions to restore what was lost. But when impermanence is understood deeply, this reaction softens. Instead of trying to rebuild the past, the mind becomes curious about what the present moment is offering. This curiosity transforms the emotional experience of change. A person who resists impermanence constantly feels threatened by life. Every unexpected event feels like a disruption. Every shift feels like a loss of control. But someone who accepts impermanence sees life as a flowing process rather than a fixed structure. Nothing needs to remain frozen in place. One of the most powerful teachings within Buddhist philosophy is the concept of anicca, the understanding that all conditioned things are temporary. This insight is not meant to create sadness. It is meant to create freedom. Because when the mind stops expecting permanence, it stops experiencing shock when change arrives. Instead of fighting the movement of life, it moves with it. A river provides a helpful reflection of this principle. If someone stands in the middle of a river and tries to stop the water from flowing, the experience will be exhausting and frustrating. The river will continue moving regardless of resistance. But if the person understands that the river is meant to flow, they can step onto the shore and simply observe its movement. Life behaves in a similar way. Events continue unfolding whether the mind accepts them or not. Time continues passing whether someone is ready for it or not. The only real choice the mind has is how it relates to this movement. Resistance creates tension. Acceptance creates stability. Acceptance does not mean passively allowing harmful situations to continue. It means recognizing reality clearly before deciding how to respond. When something changes, the mind first acknowledges that change has already happened. This simple recognition removes the illusion that the past can be restored. Energy that would have been spent resisting the new reality becomes available for responding wisely to it. Another beautiful effect of accepting impermanence is the deep appreciation it creates for the present moment. When people believe things will last forever, they often overlook the value of what they have. Relationships are taken for granted. Moments of joy pass unnoticed. Ordinary experiences feel unimportant. But when impermanence is understood, every moment becomes precious. A conversation with a friend becomes meaningful because both people know time is limited. A peaceful morning becomes beautiful because the mind recognizes that it will not last forever. Impermanence transforms ordinary life into something vivid and alive. Even difficult experiences become easier to endure when the mind remembers that nothing remains unchanged forever. Painful moments eventually shift. Emotional storms eventually calm. Uncertainty eventually becomes clarity. The same impermanence that allows joy to fade also allows suffering to dissolve. This understanding creates resilience. When something difficult happens, the mind remembers that the situation is part of a larger movement. Instead of believing the current moment defines the entire future, awareness recognizes that change is always continuing. Emotional shock loses its power because the mind no longer expects life to remain fixed. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening?" the mind becomes open to the question, "What is this moment asking me to understand?" This curiosity allows growth to emerge even during challenging times. Another subtle transformation appears when someone truly accepts impermanence. Attachment begins to soften. People often cling tightly to roles, identities, possessions, and expectations because they believe those things define who they are. When those attachments change, identity feels threatened. But when impermanence is understood deeply, identity becomes more flexible. But when impermanence is understood deeply, identity becomes more flexible. The mind no longer depends on specific circumstances to feel stable. A person can move through different phases of life without feeling lost. Roles may change, environments may shift, relationships may evolve, but the inner sense of awareness remains steady. This flexibility creates extraordinary emotional strength. The person becomes like bamboo bending during strong winds. Rigid trees often break when storms arrive because they cannot move with the wind. Bamboo survives because it bends and returns upright when the storm passes. Human resilience follows the same principle. When the mind resists change, it becomes rigid and fragile. When the mind accepts change, it becomes flexible and enduring. Over time, this understanding produces a quiet form of confidence. Not the confidence that comes from controlling circumstances, but the confidence that comes from trusting one's ability to navigate change. Life will continue presenting new situations. Unexpected opportunities will appear, difficult challenges will arise, relationships will evolve, paths will shift in directions that could never have been predicted. But a mind that accepts impermanence no longer fears this movement. It understands that change is not the enemy of stability. It is the environment in which stability is discovered. Because when the mind stops trying to freeze life in place, it discovers something much deeper. A steadiness that exists beneath all movement. A calm center that does not depend on circumstances remaining the same. And from that center, life can continue changing freely while the mind remains quietly unshaken. And once the mind begins to understand impermanence, another quiet challenge slowly reveals itself. Accepting that life changes is one thing. Living peacefully while those changes are still unfolding is something deeper. Because many of life's most difficult moments do not come from change that has already happened. They come from the space before change reveals its outcome. It is the space where the future has not yet answered, and this is where the mind often struggles the most. There is a particular tension that appears when the future becomes unclear. A conversation has not happened yet. A decision has not been made yet. An opportunity has not revealed its result yet. A situation is moving forward, but no one knows exactly where it will lead. The mind senses the uncertainty immediately. Something inside begins searching for answers. Thoughts begin forming possible outcomes. The mind jumps ahead, trying to predict what will happen next. If the answer cannot be found quickly, anxiety quietly grows. It feels as if something important must be solved right now. This urge is deeply human. The mind naturally wants clarity. Clear outcomes create a sense of control. Control creates the feeling of safety. When that safety disappears, the mind tries to rebuild it through prediction. But prediction rarely provides real peace. Instead, it often creates more mental noise. When the mind begins imagining possible futures, it rarely stops with just one scenario. It creates many, some hopeful, others fearful. Each possibility pulls the mind in a different emotional direction. What if everything works out perfectly? What if it fails completely? What if people react badly? What if things become worse than expected? Within minutes, the mind can travel through dozens of imagined futures that have not happened. This movement creates tension because the body reacts to imagined situations as if they were real. Heart rate increases, muscles tighten, breathing becomes shallow, and attention becomes scattered. All of this happens even though nothing has actually occurred yet. The anxiety comes from trying to control something that has not yet revealed itself. Buddhist teachings approach this experience in a very different way. Instead of trying to force certainty from the unknown, the practice invites the mind to sit peacefully inside uncertainty. This may sound uncomfortable at first. Most people have spent years training their minds to escape uncertainty as quickly as possible, planning, predicting, worrying, analyzing. These habits are often seen as responsible behavior. But there is a subtle difference between thoughtful preparation and anxious control. Preparation works with the information that already exists. Control tries to force answers from information that does not yet exist. When the mind pushes beyond what can realistically be known, it enters the territory of anxiety. The courage to allow uncertainty begins with recognizing this boundary. There are moments when action is necessary. Decisions must be made, plans must be developed. But there are also moments when the future simply has not revealed itself yet. In those moments, the wisest action may be waiting. Waiting does not mean doing nothing. It means allowing life to unfold without forcing conclusions prematurely. This kind of patience requires courage because the mind often interprets waiting as vulnerability. Without clear answers, the mind feels exposed. But Buddhist wisdom suggests that this exposure is not dangerous. It is simply part of being alive. Life has always included unknowns. Every person who has ever lived has moved through periods where the future remained unclear. Decisions were made without perfect information. Outcomes appeared that no one predicted. Yet life continued moving forward. The mind's demand for total certainty is unrealistic. Recognizing this truth softens the urgency to solve every future outcome immediately. Instead of forcing answers, the mind begins developing trust in the unfolding process. This trust does not mean blindly hoping for the best. It means accepting that the present moment is the only place where awareness and action truly exist. The future will reveal itself through time. Anxiety often appears when the mind tries to live in tomorrow while the body remains in today. Thoughts rush forward, but reality has not arrived there yet. Mindfulness gently brings attention back to what is actually happening now. Breathing continues, the body is present, the moment is real, the unknown future exists only as thoughts. This awareness creates a surprising sense of relief. Instead of carrying the weight of many possible futures, the mind returns to the simplicity of the present moment. Another important realization appears when someone practices sitting peacefully with uncertainty. Not knowing is not the same as danger. The mind often treats uncertainty as a threat. But in many situations, uncertainty simply means the story is still unfolding. The mind may not yet have enough information. Clarity often arrives through experience rather than prediction. Many people can look back on moments in their lives when uncertainty once felt terrifying. Perhaps a job change, a relationship shift, or an unexpected opportunity created confusion. At the time, the mind desperately wanted immediate answers. Yet with time, the situation unfolded in ways that could never have been predicted. Sometimes the outcome turned out better than expected. Sometimes it led to lessons that shaped personal growth. Sometimes it simply revealed a new direction. The important point is that clarity arrived eventually, but it did not arrive through anxious prediction. It arrived through the natural unfolding of events. Understanding this pattern builds confidence in the unknown. When the mind realizes that uncertainty has always been part of life's journey, it becomes less afraid of experiencing it again. Instead of interpreting uncertainty as chaos, it begins to see it as an open space where many possibilities exist. This perspective changes the emotional experience completely. Anxiety narrows perception. It focuses attention on potential problems. Curiosity expands perception. It allows the mind to remain open to multiple outcomes. Curiosity becomes a powerful companion when facing the unknown. Instead of asking, "What if something goes wrong?" the mind begins asking, "What might this situation reveal?" This shift does not remove uncertainty, but it transforms how uncertainty feels. The unknown becomes less threatening and more intriguing. Buddhist meditation often trains this attitude by encouraging gentle awareness of whatever arises in the present moment. When thoughts about the future appear, the mind simply notices them. Instead of chasing the thought or fighting it, awareness allows it to pass. The mind learns that thoughts about the future are only mental events, not immediate realities. This recognition weakens the habit of building entire emotional reactions around imagined outcomes. The future returns to its proper place, not as something that must be solved instantly, but as something that will unfold in time. Patience begins growing naturally within this understanding. Patience does not mean passivity. It means allowing the process of life to reveal information gradually. Some answers cannot be forced. Some clarity only arrives after experience has moved forward. A seed does not become a tree overnight. Growth happens through stages that cannot be rushed. In the same way, many situations in life require time before their meaning becomes visible. Allowing uncertainty creates space for wisdom to develop. When the mind stops demanding immediate certainty, it becomes more attentive to subtle signals. Opportunities that might have been overlooked become visible. Emotions that might have been ignored become understandable. Relationships that might have been forced into quick conclusions gain room to evolve naturally. Uncertainty becomes a teacher rather than an enemy. It teaches patience, humility, and openness. It reminds the mind that life cannot be fully controlled, only experienced. This realization creates deep inner stability. Because when someone no longer fears the unknown, many of the mind's anxieties lose their foundation. Life will continue presenting situations where outcomes are unclear. But a mind that has practiced sitting peacefully with uncertainty no longer feels overwhelmed. It remains grounded in the present moment while the future quietly approaches. This calm presence allows wiser decisions to emerge naturally when the time is right. And slowly, gently, the person discovers that courage does not always mean taking bold action. Sometimes courage means simply remaining still while the future reveals itself. And as the mind begins to develop the courage to sit peacefully with uncertainty, another quiet discovery begins to unfold. Even when someone accepts that the future cannot always be controlled, moments will still arrive when emotions rise suddenly. Fear can appear without warning. Frustration can grow quickly. Anger can surge before the mind has time to fully understand what is happening. Life continues presenting situations that test emotional endurance. In those moments, awareness may still be present, but the mind can feel overwhelmed by the speed of its own reactions. Thoughts begin racing, the body tightens, the mind starts spiraling through possible outcomes, worries, or imagined conflicts. The present moment becomes clouded by emotional intensity. And this is where one of the simplest and most powerful teachings in Buddhist practice reveals itself. When the mind begins to spin, return to the breath. Something remarkable about the breath is that it is always available. It does not require preparation, equipment, or special conditions. Whether someone is sitting quietly, walking through a crowded street, standing in a difficult conversation, or facing an unexpected challenge, the breath is always happening. Most of the time, people barely notice it. Breathing continues quietly in the background of life. It happens automatically, without attention, without effort. But when awareness gently turns toward the breath, it becomes a doorway back into balance. This doorway exists because the breath is deeply connected to the state of the mind. When the mind becomes anxious, breathing often becomes shallow and quick. When anger rises, breathing becomes heavy and tense. When fear appears, the breath may feel tight or uneven. The body and the mind move together in a continuous rhythm. By returning attention to the breath, the mind begins influencing that rhythm again. Instead of allowing emotional storms to control breathing patterns, awareness reconnects the mind with the natural movement of the body. This connection creates an anchor during chaos. When emotions surge strongly, the mind often becomes trapped in thoughts. Thoughts feed emotions, and emotions feed more thoughts. The cycle grows quickly until the mind feels overwhelmed. Returning to the breath interrupts this cycle. The moment attention rests on breathing, the mind steps away from the endless stream of thoughts. Instead of following each thought into another imagined scenario, awareness simply observes the inhale and the exhale. Air enters the body, air leaves the body. This rhythm may appear very simple, but simplicity is exactly what the mind needs during moments of chaos. Complex thinking often intensifies emotional storms. The mind tries to analyze, solve, predict, and defend all at once. Breathing awareness brings attention back to something steady and real. The breath happens only in the present moment. It cannot occur in the past or the future. Every inhale happens now. Every exhale happens now. When the mind returns to the breath, it naturally returns to the present moment as well. The present moment has a calming effect on the nervous system because most emotional distress comes from thoughts about what has already happened or what might happen later. When attention remains with the breath, those thoughts begin losing their grip. The mind gradually slows down. Another reason breathing awareness is so powerful is that it engages the body directly. Emotions are not only mental experiences, they are physical experiences as well. Fear tightens muscles. Anger increases heat in the body. Stress affects the heart and stomach. When breathing becomes slow and steady, it sends signals throughout the nervous system that the body is safe. The heart rate gradually slows. Muscles begin releasing tension. The mind follows the body into a calmer state. Buddhist meditation traditions have understood this connection for centuries. Many meditation practices begin with nothing more complicated than observing the breath. A person sits quietly and watches each inhale and exhale. No need to change the breath, no need to force anything. Simply notice the movement. Air enters, air leaves. At first, the mind may wander constantly. Thoughts will appear about work, conversations, plans, or worries. Each time attention drifts away, the practice gently returns to breathing again. This repetition trains the mind to return to the present moment more easily. Over time, the breath becomes a familiar refuge. Whenever life becomes chaotic, attention naturally remembers where to return. This habit becomes incredibly valuable during emotionally intense situations. For example, imagine someone receiving unexpected criticism. The mind might immediately begin reacting. Defensive thoughts appear. Anger may rise quickly. If the mind follows those thoughts immediately, the conversation can escalate rapidly. But if awareness returns to the breath, something changes. One slow inhale, one steady exhale, the mind gains a few moments of space before reacting. Within that space, emotional intensity begins to soften. The person may still respond to the situation, but the response will come from clarity rather than impulsive emotion. The breath creates that space. Another example appears during moments of fear. Fear often pulls the mind far into the future. Thoughts imagine possible disasters, failures, or painful outcomes that may never happen. The mind begins racing ahead of reality. Returning to the breath brings attention back from the imagined future into the present moment. In this moment, breathing is happening. The body is alive. The present situation may not be as overwhelming as the imagined scenarios suggested. The breath gently reminds the mind that the present moment is manageable, one breath at a time. This phrase is often repeated in meditation teachings because it captures something deeply important. Life does not need to be solved all at once. It can be experienced one breath at a time. Each breath becomes a small step of stability. When emotions feel overwhelming, focusing on the next breath makes the experience manageable. The mind no longer feels responsible for solving the entire future. It only needs to stay present for this moment. And then the next one. Over time, this practice builds extraordinary emotional resilience. The person begins trusting their ability to return to balance, even during chaos. The breath becomes like a quiet friend, always waiting nearby. Whenever confusion appears, it is there. Whenever anger rises, it is there. Whenever fear grows loud, it is still there. Steady, patient, constant. Another subtle benefit appears when someone regularly returns to the breath during difficult moments. Clarity begins to emerge naturally. Emotional storms often cloud judgment. When thoughts and feelings move too quickly, it becomes difficult to see situations accurately. But breathing awareness slows the entire system. The mind becomes quieter. Within that quietness, understanding begins to appear. A person may realize that the situation is not as threatening as it seemed, or they may see a wiser way to respond, or they may recognize that silence is more helpful than speaking. The breath does not provide answers directly. It provides the calmness in which answers can appear. This calmness is one of the greatest gifts mindfulness offers. Many problems in life do not require immediate solutions. They require a clear mind capable of responding wisely. Returning to the breath creates that clarity. It reconnects awareness with the present moment. It steadies the nervous system. It interrupts cycles of emotional escalation. It creates space between stimulus and reaction. Most importantly, it reminds the mind that stability is always available inside the body itself. The breath becomes a living reminder that calmness does not need to be searched for outside. It already exists within each inhale and exhale. Life will always contain moments of chaos. Unexpected events will happen. Difficult conversations will arise. Fear and anger will occasionally appear. But someone who knows how to return to the breath carries a powerful tool everywhere they go. When the mind begins spiraling, the breath becomes the doorway back to balance. One inhale, one exhale, and slowly the storm begins to quiet. And as the mind learns to return to the breath during moments of chaos, another quiet shift begins to unfold. The breath calms the storm, the body softens, and awareness returns to the present moment. But when the mind becomes still enough to observe itself clearly, something surprising begins to appear. The storm was never only the emotion, the storm was also the thoughts. During moments of anger, fear, or anxiety, thoughts arrive quickly and confidently. They speak with certainty. They sound convincing. They often appear as statements about reality. Yet many of these thoughts are not facts at all. They are interpretations, assumptions, predictions, or memories replaying themselves in the mind. And this realization leads to one of the most powerful insights within Buddhist mindfulness. A thought appearing in the mind does not mean it is true. There is a subtle habit inside human consciousness that most people never question. Whenever a thought appears, the mind immediately treats it as if it represents reality. If the thought says something is wrong, the body reacts as if danger is present. If the thought predicts failure, the mind feels discouraged even before anything has happened. If the thought recalls a painful memory, emotions return as if the event is happening again. The mind often believes its own voice without hesitation. This happens because thoughts arrive in a very convincing form. They do not announce themselves as guesses or possibilities. They arrive as statements. A thought may say, "This situation will end badly." Another thought might say, "That person disrespected you." Another thought may whisper, "You are not capable of handling this." When these statements appear, they feel authoritative, but mindfulness invites the mind to look more closely. Instead of immediately believing every thought, awareness begins observing thoughts as events inside the mind. A thought appears, it stays for a moment, then it disappears, another thought follows. This movement becomes visible once the mind slows down enough to watch. Just like emotions, thoughts behave like temporary patterns moving through consciousness. They arise from countless influences: past experiences, learned beliefs, current mood, memories, expectations, and even physical sensations in the body. But because the mind is accustomed to trusting its thoughts automatically, it rarely pauses to examine them. This automatic trust creates many emotional struggles. For example, a single thought can create a chain reaction. The mind may think something bad is going to happen. That thought produces fear. The fear then generates more thoughts about possible problems. Each thought strengthens the emotion, and the emotion strengthens the next thought. Within minutes, the mind may become trapped in a powerful loop. Yet if awareness simply pauses and observes the original thought, something different becomes possible. Instead of saying, "This is true," the mind can say, "This is a thought." That simple shift changes everything. The thought still exists, but it loses its authority. It becomes something to observe rather than something to obey. This practice is sometimes described as stepping back from the mind. Instead of standing inside every thought, awareness steps outside the stream of thinking and watches it from a distance. Thoughts continue flowing, but they no longer define reality automatically. This distance creates freedom. Freedom from reacting to every idea that appears. Freedom from emotional storms created by unexamined thoughts. Freedom from believing negative stories about oneself or the future without question. Mindfulness does not attempt to eliminate thoughts completely. The human mind naturally produces them. Trying to stop thinking entirely would be like trying to stop clouds from forming in the sky. Instead, mindfulness changes the relationship with thinking. Thoughts are allowed to appear, but they are not treated as commands. This relationship becomes clearer through observation. When someone watches their thoughts carefully, they begin noticing patterns. Some thoughts repeat themselves frequently. The mind may replay certain worries again and again. Other thoughts appear suddenly and disappear quickly. Some thoughts seem helpful and creative. Others seem critical or fearful, but all of them share one important quality: they come and go. Even the most powerful thought cannot stay permanently. It may return later in a different form, but the original thought always dissolves eventually. This impermanence reveals something important about the mind. Thoughts do not have the power people often give them. They only gain power when they are believed automatically. For example, consider how many different thoughts appear during a single day. Some thoughts are about tasks that need to be completed. Others remember conversations from the past. Some create imaginary scenarios about the future. If every thought were taken seriously, the mind would be pulled in hundreds of different directions. But when thoughts are observed calmly, it becomes clear that many of them are simply mental noise. They are fragments of memory, imagination, or habit. They pass through awareness without requiring action. This understanding protects emotional stability. When a negative thought appears, the mind no longer needs to panic. Instead, it can ask a gentle question: is this thought actually true? Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the thought reflects useful information. It may remind someone of a responsibility, highlight a real problem, or suggest a helpful solution. But many thoughts do not hold this kind of value. They may exaggerate danger, criticize the self unfairly, or assume intentions that cannot be known. Observing thoughts carefully allows the mind to distinguish between useful thinking and mental storytelling. This distinction is essential for emotional balance. Without it, the mind becomes vulnerable to its own internal narratives. A simple example appears when someone receives criticism. The mind may immediately produce thoughts such as, "They think I am incompetent," or "Everyone must be judging me now." These thoughts feel convincing because they appear quickly and confidently. But when observed calmly, they reveal themselves as interpretations rather than facts. The person may simply have received feedback about a specific situation. The mind created a much larger story around it. By observing the thought instead of believing it instantly, the emotional reaction becomes smaller. Clarity replaces assumption. Another common pattern involves thoughts about the future. The mind may predict negative outcomes before events even occur. A presentation may trigger thoughts of failure. A conversation may trigger thoughts of rejection. These predictions often feel real enough to create anxiety. Yet most predictions about the future are uncertain at best. They are mental guesses, not guaranteed realities. Mindfulness encourages the mind to see these predictions as thoughts rather than truths. The thought may say, "This will go badly." Awareness responds gently. That is a thought about the future. The future has not happened yet. This response creates space. Within that space, the emotional charge of the thought weakens. The mind becomes less controlled by imagined scenarios. Another interesting discovery appears when someone practices observing thoughts regularly. Many thoughts are influenced by emotional states. When the body is tired, the mind often produces pessimistic thoughts. When the body feels energetic, thoughts become more optimistic. When stress is present, the mind generates more worries. This means thoughts are not always reliable reflections of reality. They are influenced by changing conditions inside the body and environment. Recognizing this helps the mind avoid becoming trapped by temporary mental states. Instead of believing every thought during a stressful moment, awareness can simply notice the pattern. Stress is present. The mind is producing anxious thoughts. These thoughts may pass once the body relaxes. This observation prevents the mind from building dramatic conclusions during temporary emotional states. Over time, the ability to observe thoughts strengthens mental resilience. Situations that once triggered overwhelming worry begin to feel manageable. Instead of reacting to each thought as if it were urgent, the mind becomes more selective. Only thoughts that truly require attention are followed. The rest are allowed to pass naturally. This selective attention protects emotional energy. Many people feel mentally exhausted because they spend the entire day reacting to every thought that appears. Mindfulness reduces this exhaustion by creating distance between awareness and thinking. Thoughts continue appearing, but they no longer demand constant engagement. The mind becomes quieter. Within that quietness, something deeper becomes visible. Awareness itself. Awareness is the space in which thoughts arise. Thoughts move within awareness, but awareness remains steady. Just as clouds move across the sky, while the sky itself remains unchanged, thoughts move across awareness, while awareness remains clear. Recognizing this difference changes the way the mind experiences itself. Identity shifts away from thinking and toward observing. The person no longer feels defined by every thought. They recognize themselves as the awareness that notices those thoughts. This realization creates profound emotional stability, because once awareness becomes the center of identity, thoughts lose their ability to manipulate emotions so easily. Fearful thoughts may still appear, but they no longer feel like commands. Critical thoughts may arise, but they no longer define self-worth. Negative predictions may appear, but they no longer control the present moment. Thoughts become like passing visitors rather than permanent residents, and as the mind continues practicing this gentle observation, clarity grows naturally. The inner landscape becomes easier to navigate. Emotional storms lose much of their power because the mind has finally discovered that not every voice inside it needs to be believed. And when the mind begins learning how to observe thoughts instead of believing them automatically, another quiet transformation starts to unfold. Thoughts still appear, emotions still arise, but something inside no longer feels trapped by them. Awareness begins to notice that there is space between the observer and the experience. A thought may be present, but it no longer fills the entire mind. An emotion may rise, but it no longer consumes the entire inner world. And this discovery opens the door to something even deeper, because one of the main reasons emotions feel overwhelming is not always their intensity, it is their size inside the mind. Sometimes a single thought or feeling becomes so large that it occupies the entire mental landscape. The mind focuses so closely on the experience that everything else disappears from view. When this happens, the emotion feels suffocating. It feels as if there is no room for anything else. But Buddhist training introduces a powerful shift in perception. Instead of shrinking awareness around the experience, the mind learns to expand awareness around the experience. This is the practice of inner spaciousness. There is a natural habit within the mind that causes it to narrow attention when something uncomfortable appears. When fear arises, attention locks onto the feared situation. When anger appears, the mind zooms in on the person or event that triggered it. When sadness emerges, the mind focuses intensely on the painful memory or thought behind it. This narrowing creates the feeling of emotional overwhelm. The experience fills the entire field of attention. But mindfulness gently reverses this habit. Instead of tightening attention around the emotion, awareness begins widening its field. The emotion is still present, but now it exists within a much larger mental space. To understand this, it can help to notice how the mind experiences physical environments. Standing in a small, crowded room can feel very different from standing in an open field. In a small room, movement feels restricted. There is little space to move or breathe freely. In an open landscape, the body relaxes naturally. The vastness creates a sense of freedom. The same principle applies inside the mind. When awareness becomes narrow, emotions feel trapped and overwhelming. When awareness becomes spacious, those same emotions become easier to observe. They still exist, but they are no longer suffocating. Inner spaciousness allows thoughts and emotions to appear like objects floating in a wide sky of awareness. Instead of filling the entire mind, they occupy only a small part of it. This shift changes the emotional experience dramatically. For example, when someone feels anxious, the mind often zooms tightly into the source of the worry. Thoughts repeat again and again. The imagined problem becomes larger and larger. But when awareness expands, the anxious thought becomes only one element within a wider field of experience. The mind can notice the breath moving in the body. It can notice the sensation of the feet touching the ground. It can notice sounds in the environment. It can notice other thoughts passing by. The anxious thought is still present, but it is no longer the entire story. It becomes one movement among many. This expanded awareness reduces the emotional intensity naturally. It works because the mind is no longer feeding the emotion with exclusive attention. Attention is the energy that amplifies experiences. Whatever the mind focuses on becomes stronger in perception. When attention is narrow, the experience grows large. When attention widens, the experience becomes balanced within the larger field of awareness. This is why Buddhist meditation often encourages observing the full range of present moment sensations rather than focusing only on a single problem. The mind learns to feel the breath, hear surrounding sounds, notice bodily sensations, and observe thoughts, all within one open awareness. This openness creates mental spaciousness. Within that spaciousness, emotions become easier to hold. They no longer feel like overwhelming waves crashing into the mind. They become gentle ripples moving across a wide lake. Another important aspect of inner spaciousness involves perspective. When the mind becomes trapped inside an emotion, perspective disappears. The situation feels permanent and absolute. Anger may convince the mind that a conflict defines the entire relationship. Fear may convince the mind that a possible failure defines the entire future. But when awareness widens, perspective returns. The mind begins remembering that life contains many layers beyond the current emotion. There are other experiences happening at the same time. There are other possibilities that the narrow focus could not see. This perspective softens emotional reactions. Instead of feeling trapped within a single emotional frame, the mind recognizes that the current experience is only one moment within a much larger life. Another way to understand inner spaciousness is to notice the difference between being inside the storm and observing the storm. When someone stands directly in the center of a storm, wind and rain dominate their experience completely. Visibility becomes limited. Movement becomes difficult. But if someone steps back and watches the storm from a sheltered distance, the experience changes. The storm still exists, but it can now be observed with clarity. Inner spaciousness creates that shelter within the mind. Thoughts and emotions continue moving, but awareness remains outside their intensity. This practice becomes especially valuable during moments of emotional overwhelm. When anger feels intense, instead of fighting the emotion or reacting impulsively, the mind gently expands its awareness. It notices the body sitting in the room. It notices the breath rising and falling. It notices sounds beyond the immediate conflict. The anger is still present, but it no longer fills the entire mind. It becomes one sensation among many. This broader awareness naturally reduces the emotional pressure. Another benefit of inner spaciousness is that it increases tolerance for difficult experiences. Many emotional struggles become overwhelming because the mind believes it cannot handle them. But when awareness becomes spacious, the mind discovers that it can hold difficult emotions without collapsing. The emotion exists within a wide field of awareness that remains stable. This stability builds confidence. Instead of fearing emotional experiences, the mind learns that it can observe them calmly. Over time, the mind becomes less reactive. Situations that once triggered immediate emotional responses begin to feel manageable. This transformation does not occur because life becomes easier. It occurs because awareness becomes larger. A large container can hold strong experiences without overflowing. Inner spaciousness creates that container. Another subtle shift appears as this practice deepens. The mind becomes less defensive. When awareness is narrow, criticism or conflict can feel like a personal attack on identity. The mind reacts quickly to protect itself, but when awareness becomes spacious, the mind sees the situation more clearly. A comment from another person becomes just one event within a wider context. It may still require a response, but it no longer feels like a threat to the entire self. This reduces unnecessary conflict. Many arguments escalate because both minds are trapped in narrow emotional focus. Each person sees only the immediate offense, but someone practicing inner spaciousness can hold the situation within a broader perspective. They see the other person's emotions, the circumstances surrounding the moment, and their own internal reactions, all within the same awareness. This clarity allows more balanced responses. Another beautiful aspect of spacious awareness is the sense of calm it creates. When the mind feels crowded with thoughts and emotions, tension builds naturally. But when awareness becomes open and wide, the mind relaxes. It no longer needs to control every mental movement. Thoughts come and go, emotions rise and fall. Awareness remains steady. This calmness does not depend on eliminating difficult experiences. It depends on expanding the space in which those experiences occur. In this spacious mind, emotions are allowed to exist without dominating consciousness. They become visitors rather than rulers. The mind becomes like a vast sky where countless clouds may pass. Some clouds are dark, some light, some large, some small. But the sky itself remains open and unchanged. This understanding creates deep inner stability. When life presents challenges, the mind no longer feels overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. Instead, it gently widens its awareness. Within that wide awareness, the experience finds its proper place. And from that spacious perspective, emotional balance naturally returns. And as the mind learns to create inner spaciousness, something remarkable begins to happen. Thoughts and emotions no longer dominate the entire field of awareness. They appear within a wider space, where they can be observed without immediate reaction. The mind becomes less crowded, less reactive, more capable of seeing events clearly instead of becoming trapped inside them. But this wider awareness begins revealing another subtle truth about emotional disturbance. Many emotional storms are not created by the event itself. They are created by the story the mind tells about who caused it. A strange thing happens whenever something unpleasant occurs. A harsh comment appears. A rude action happens. Someone behaves unfairly or carelessly. The mind immediately begins searching for someone to blame. Blame gives the mind a target, and once a target appears, anger quickly follows. This reaction feels natural. Most people believe anger is simply the result of being treated badly. If someone does something harmful, anger seems like the logical response. But Buddhist wisdom invites a deeper look at what is actually happening inside the mind. There is an ancient teaching often described through a simple image. Two boats drift on a quiet river. One person sits inside a small wooden boat, floating peacefully across the water. Suddenly, another boat drifts toward them and crashes into their side. The impact startles them, perhaps spilling water or disturbing their balance. At first, anger begins rising, but when the person looks up, they notice something important. The other boat is empty. There is no one inside controlling it, no one steering it, no one intending to cause harm. The boat simply drifted with the current, and in that moment, the anger disappears. Because without someone to blame, the emotional reaction dissolves almost instantly. The event still happened. The boat still collided. But the anger vanishes because the mind cannot direct blame toward anyone. This simple image reveals something powerful about the nature of anger. Anger is rarely about the event itself. It is about the belief that someone intentionally caused the event. When the mind believes a person is responsible, anger grows quickly. But when responsibility disappears, anger often fades just as quickly. This insight reveals how strongly the mind attaches meaning to situations. The same event can produce very different emotional reactions depending on how it is interpreted. If someone bumps into you accidentally in a crowded place, the mind may react with mild surprise and quickly move on. But if the mind believes the person did it deliberately, irritation or anger may appear. The physical event is nearly identical. What changed was the interpretation. Buddhist teachings encourage examining this interpretation carefully. Often the mind assumes intention where there may be none. It creates stories about why someone behaved a certain way, even when the full situation is unknown. Someone fails to respond to a message. The mind may immediately assume disrespect. A colleague appears distant. The mind may assume rejection. A driver cuts in front of another car. The mind may assume aggression. But in many cases, the true reasons behind these events remain unclear. The other person may be distracted, overwhelmed, unaware, or dealing with difficulties that have nothing to do with you. Yet the mind quickly creates a narrative of offense. This narrative fuels anger. The wisdom of the empty boat invites the mind to question these assumptions. What if the other boat is empty? What if the event that triggered frustration was not intended as a personal attack? What if the other person's behavior was simply the result of circumstances, confusion, stress, or ignorance? This shift does not excuse harmful behavior or prevent necessary boundaries, but it changes how the mind experiences the situation internally. Instead of immediately reacting with anger, awareness pauses. The mind becomes curious rather than accusatory. This pause often reveals that the emotional intensity was created more by interpretation than by the event itself. Another layer of understanding appears when someone practices viewing situations through the lens of the empty boat. People begin recognizing how much suffering is created by taking things personally. Personal offense transforms ordinary events into emotional conflicts. A casual comment becomes an insult. A mistake becomes disrespect. A misunderstanding becomes betrayal. The mind becomes highly sensitive to perceived attacks on identity. But when events are viewed with greater spaciousness, many of these perceived attacks dissolve. A person might say something careless without intending harm. Another person might act impatiently because they are under pressure. Understanding this does not mean accepting mistreatment silently, but it does prevent unnecessary emotional escalation. The mind responds with clarity instead of immediate anger. This clarity often improves communication as well. When anger dominates a conversation, listening becomes difficult. Each person focuses on defending themselves or attacking the other side. But when the mind remains calm, understanding becomes possible. Instead of reacting to the imagined intention behind someone's behavior, the mind can ask questions and explore what actually happened. Many conflicts resolve naturally once misunderstandings are cleared. The wisdom of the empty boat also encourages compassion. Recognizing that people are often influenced by their own struggles softens the impulse to blame. A person who behaves harshly may be carrying stress, fear, or pain of their own. A person who seems distant may be dealing with personal challenges invisible to others. Seeing these possibilities does not justify harmful actions, but it prevents the mind from reducing others to simple villains. Human behavior becomes more complex, more understandable. Compassion grows naturally when the mind sees beyond the immediate offense. Another powerful benefit of this perspective is the protection it offers against emotional manipulation. Some people deliberately provoke reactions from others. They seek attention, conflict, or control by triggering emotional responses. If someone reacts immediately with anger, the provocation succeeds. But when the mind practices the wisdom of the empty boat, those provocations lose much of their power. Without reaction, the emotional chain breaks. The other person's attempt to create disturbance falls into empty space. The mind remains calm, stable, and free. This freedom becomes deeply valuable in everyday life. Not every event deserves emotional investment. Not every comment requires defense. Not every misunderstanding needs escalation. By interpreting events with spacious awareness, the mind preserves its energy for situations that truly matter. Emotional equilibrium becomes easier to maintain. The wisdom of the empty boat also reminds the mind of its own imperfections. Just as others sometimes act without awareness, the same thing happens in reverse. Everyone occasionally speaks carelessly, reacts impulsively, or misunderstands situations. Recognizing this shared human tendency reduces harsh judgment. Instead of seeing others as intentional adversaries, the mind sees fellow travelers navigating their own challenges. This recognition fosters patience. Patience creates space for understanding. And understanding often dissolves anger before it has time to grow. Over time, this practice changes how the mind experiences daily life. Situations that once triggered frustration begin feeling lighter. A rude comment may still be noticed, but it no longer dominates the entire day. A small mistake made by someone else becomes easier to forgive. Traffic delays, misunderstandings, and minor inconveniences lose their emotional weight. The mind remains centered. This does not mean ignoring injustice or allowing harmful behavior to continue. There are moments when action must be taken, boundaries must be set, and truth must be spoken. But when those actions come from calm clarity rather than anger, they become far more effective. Anger clouds judgment. Clarity strengthens it. The wisdom of the empty boat teaches that emotional equilibrium is not achieved by controlling other people's behavior. It is achieved by changing how the mind interprets events. When blame disappears, anger loses its foundation. The collision may still happen, but the mind remains steady, and from that steadiness, wiser responses naturally appear. And as the wisdom of the empty boat begins settling into the mind, another quiet realization slowly emerges. Many moments of anger were never truly about the event itself. They were about the expectation that people should behave differently than they did. When that expectation breaks, frustration appears almost instantly. The mind feels disappointed, offended, or betrayed because reality did not match the picture it created beforehand. But as awareness deepens, the mind begins to see something that was always present but rarely acknowledged. Human beings are imperfect, not occasionally imperfect, naturally imperfect, and when this truth is deeply understood rather than merely accepted intellectually, emotional stability becomes far easier to maintain. Because many emotional disturbances are born from silent expectations that people should always behave wisely, kindly, fairly, and thoughtfully. The mind quietly assumes that others should understand situations clearly, respond maturely, communicate perfectly, and act with constant awareness. But reality rarely moves in such a polished way. People misunderstand each other. They speak before thinking. They react from emotion rather than wisdom. They carry stress, fatigue, fear, and countless internal pressures that influence their behavior in ways others cannot see. When these imperfections appear, the mind often reacts with frustration. Someone forgets a promise. Someone says something insensitive. Someone fails to notice the effort you made. Someone behaves selfishly. In these moments, the mind may think, they should know better. And that single sentence becomes the root of emotional disturbance, because hidden within that thought is an assumption that people should behave flawlessly. Buddhist teachings invite the mind to examine this assumption carefully. Instead of expecting perfection from human behavior, awareness begins recognizing the fragile and complicated nature of the human mind itself. Every person carries their own history of experiences, fears, desires, habits, and misunderstandings. These inner influences shape their actions in ways that are not always logical or intentional. A person who appears rude may simply be overwhelmed by their own worries. A person who seems careless may be struggling with exhaustion. A person who speaks harshly may be carrying pain that has nothing to do with the present moment. When the mind understands this complexity, frustration begins softening, not because harmful behavior is acceptable, but because the mind no longer expects flawless conduct from imperfect beings. This shift transforms emotional reactions. Instead of seeing mistakes as personal attacks, the mind begins seeing them as expressions of human limitation. This perspective creates compassion. Compassion is not weakness. It is clarity about the nature of human behavior. When someone recognizes that people are often navigating their own internal struggles, it becomes easier to respond with patience instead of anger. Consider how quickly irritation appears when someone behaves inconsiderately. A stranger may interrupt a conversation. A coworker may miss an important detail. A family member may forget something meaningful. If the mind expects perfect awareness from others, these moments trigger immediate frustration. But when the mind accepts human imperfection as a natural condition, the emotional reaction changes. Instead of thinking, "They should not have done that," awareness may respond with a quieter understanding. People make mistakes. This recognition does not eliminate the need for communication or boundaries, but it removes the emotional shock that often accompanies imperfect behavior. Life begins to feel less like a series of disappointments and more like a shared human experience. Another important aspect of this teaching involves self-reflection. When someone becomes frustrated with others, it can be helpful to remember how often the same patterns appear in oneself. Every person occasionally speaks too quickly. Every person misunderstands situations. Every person reacts emotionally under pressure. No one moves through life with perfect clarity at all times. Recognizing this shared vulnerability dissolves harsh judgment. Instead of seeing mistakes as evidence of someone's character flaw, they are seen as part of the human condition. This understanding builds emotional resilience. Because the mind no longer expects life to unfold without friction, imperfection becomes part of the landscape rather than a surprising disruption. This acceptance reduces the emotional weight of everyday interactions. Small misunderstandings no longer feel like major offenses. Minor inconveniences no longer trigger strong reactions. The mind becomes less sensitive to the rough edges of human behavior. This calm strength also improves relationships. When people feel constantly judged for their mistakes, defensiveness grows quickly. Conversations become tense. Communication becomes cautious and guarded. But when someone responds to imperfection with patience, a different atmosphere emerges. Others feel safer being honest about their struggles. Trust deepens because mistakes are not immediately punished with anger or rejection. This environment encourages growth. People learn more easily when they are not overwhelmed by fear of judgment. Compassion creates space for improvement. Another powerful aspect of accepting imperfection is the freedom it gives to one's own mind. Constantly expecting others to behave perfectly creates endless disappointment. The mind becomes trapped in a cycle of frustration. But when expectations soften, emotional energy becomes lighter. The mind no longer feels responsible for correcting every flaw it observes in others. Instead, it focuses on maintaining its own clarity and balance. This shift creates inner peace, because peace does not require the world to become perfect. It only requires the mind to understand reality clearly. Reality includes human imperfection. Reality includes mistakes. Reality includes misunderstandings. When these elements are accepted as natural, emotional resistance disappears. Life becomes easier to navigate. This teaching also protects the mind from unrealistic ideals about relationships. Many people unconsciously expect friends, partners, or colleagues to fulfill every emotional need perfectly. When those expectations are not met, disappointment grows quickly. But relationships between imperfect humans will always contain moments of misunderstanding, forgetfulness, and emotional imbalance. Recognizing this allows relationships to breathe. Instead of demanding perfection, the mind appreciates effort and sincerity. Instead of focusing on occasional mistakes, it sees the larger picture of shared connection. This perspective nurtures deeper bonds because compassion allows relationships to survive moments of difficulty. Another important dimension of this wisdom involves forgiveness. Holding resentment often requires believing that someone should have behaved differently. But when imperfection is understood deeply, forgiveness becomes easier. Not because the behavior was acceptable, but because the mind recognizes that people often act from confusion rather than malice. This recognition releases emotional tension. The mind no longer needs to carry the weight of resentment indefinitely. It can acknowledge the mistake, learn from it, and move forward without clinging to anger. This freedom benefits both individuals. The one who made the mistake has the opportunity to grow, and the one who forgives preserves their inner peace. Over time, the practice of accepting imperfection changes how the mind experiences everyday life. Situations that once felt frustrating become easier to handle. When someone forgets something, patience appears instead of irritation. When someone speaks harshly, curiosity replaces immediate judgment. The mind becomes less reactive and more understanding. This calm strength does not make a person passive or indifferent. Boundaries can still be set. Harmful patterns can still be addressed. But these actions arise from clarity rather than emotional disturbance. Calm understanding allows responses to remain balanced. Another beautiful outcome of this practice is humility. Recognizing imperfection in others naturally leads to recognizing it within oneself. This humility softens the ego. Instead of constantly comparing, judging, or competing, the mind relaxes into the shared human experience. Everyone is learning. Everyone is navigating life with incomplete knowledge. Everyone is capable of mistakes. This shared vulnerability creates connection, and connection reduces loneliness. Because when perfection is no longer required, people can meet each other honestly. The calm strength of accepting human imperfection ultimately leads to emotional stability. When the mind no longer expects flawless behavior, it stops reacting with shock when mistakes appear. Life becomes more predictable in its unpredictability. And from this understanding, patience grows naturally. Patience allows the mind to remain steady even when others falter. Compassion replaces frustration. Understanding replaces judgment, and within that understanding, inner peace quietly takes root. And as the mind begins accepting the imperfect nature of human behavior, a quiet shift continues unfolding inside. Frustration softens. Expectations become lighter. Compassion starts replacing judgment. Life feels less like a constant battle against how people should behave and more like an unfolding experience of how people actually behave. But as this understanding deepens, another question naturally appears. If people are imperfect, emotions will continue arising. Disappointment will still visit. Anger will still appear. Sadness will still pass through the heart. Even the calmest mind cannot prevent emotions from emerging completely. And this realization leads to another important insight within Buddhist wisdom. Stability is not created by eliminating emotions. Stability is created by learning how not to cling to them. Many people believe inner peace requires suppressing emotions. They think calmness means never feeling anger, never feeling sadness, never experiencing fear. So when difficult emotions appear, they try to push them away, hide them, or deny their presence. But suppression does not dissolve emotions, it traps them. When emotions are forced down, they often remain hidden beneath the surface. They wait quietly, gathering pressure, until they eventually rise again with even greater intensity. Buddhist teachings offer a very different approach. Instead of suppressing emotions, the mind learns to allow them to appear without attachment. This practice is known as emotional non-attachment. Non-attachment does not mean indifference. It does not mean becoming cold or disconnected from feelings. It simply means allowing emotions to move through awareness without gripping them tightly or building identity around them. To understand this more clearly, it helps to notice how emotions behave naturally. Emotions are temporary experiences. They rise, they stay for a short time, then they dissolve. But the mind often interferes with this natural movement. Instead of allowing the emotion to pass, the mind begins holding on to it. It repeats the story behind the emotion again and again. It revisits the event that triggered it. It analyzes the situation endlessly. It searches for ways to justify the emotional reaction. This mental clinging prolongs the emotional experience. What could have passed within minutes sometimes lingers for hours, days, or even years. The original emotion fades, but the mind keeps recreating it through memory and interpretation. This is why emotional suffering often lasts much longer than the initial event. The problem is not the emotion itself. The problem is the attachment to the emotion. Emotional non-attachment begins by recognizing this pattern. Instead of feeding the emotion with constant thinking, awareness simply allows the emotion to exist. A feeling of anger may arise. Instead of immediately reacting or analyzing, the mind observes it gently. The body may feel warm. The chest may feel tight. The breath may become stronger. These sensations are noticed without resistance. The mind acknowledges the presence of anger, but does not build a story around it. It simply observes the experience as it unfolds. When this happens, something interesting occurs. The emotion begins following its natural cycle. Without mental reinforcement, it slowly loses intensity. Like a wave rising and falling in the ocean, the emotion eventually dissolves on its own. This process teaches the mind an important lesson. Emotions do not need to be controlled aggressively. They need to be allowed to pass. Another important part of emotional non-attachment involves language. Many people describe emotions in ways that create identification. They say, "I am angry." They say, "I am sad." They say, "I am anxious." These statements merge the emotion with identity. The feeling becomes part of the self. But Buddhist mindfulness introduces a small yet powerful shift in perspective. Instead of saying, "I am angry," the mind can notice anger is present. Instead of saying, "I am anxious," awareness observes, anxiety is appearing. This subtle change separates identity from emotion. The emotion becomes something passing through awareness rather than something that defines the person. This separation reduces emotional attachment. The mind no longer feels trapped inside the emotion. It simply observes the emotional movement. Another reason people cling to emotions is the belief that emotions must be solved immediately. When sadness appears, the mind searches for solutions. When anger appears, the mind seeks explanations. When fear appears, the mind tries to eliminate the threat. But sometimes emotions do not require immediate solutions. They simply need space to move through the body. Trying to solve an emotion too quickly can actually intensify it. The mind becomes impatient with the experience. It demands that the feeling disappear, but emotional experiences follow their own rhythm. Just as physical wounds require time to heal, emotional waves require time to settle. Emotional non-attachment respects this natural rhythm. The mind allows the emotion to exist without rushing to eliminate it. Patience replaces resistance, and within that patience, the emotional energy slowly transforms. Another important discovery appears when someone practices non-attachment to emotions regularly. Many emotions are amplified by resistance. When the mind tries to avoid fear, fear grows stronger. When the mind fights sadness, sadness deepens. When the mind resists anger, tension increases. Resistance acts like fuel for the emotional experience, but when the mind stops resisting, the emotional intensity begins fading naturally. This is similar to how physical pain behaves. If someone tightens their body around pain, the sensation often becomes stronger, But if the body relaxes and allows the sensation to exist, the discomfort often becomes easier to tolerate. The same principle applies to emotional experiences. Allowing emotions to exist without resistance creates space for them to pass. This space becomes the foundation of emotional stability. Another benefit of emotional non-attachment is clarity. When emotions dominate the mind, judgment becomes distorted. Anger may cause someone to say things they later regret. Fear may lead someone to avoid opportunities unnecessarily. Sadness may cause someone to withdraw from supportive relationships. But when emotions are observed without attachment, they lose their ability to control behavior automatically. The mind becomes capable of responding wisely instead of reacting impulsively. The emotion is acknowledged, but it does not dictate action. This creates freedom. Freedom to choose responses carefully. Freedom to act with awareness rather than emotional pressure. Another subtle change appears as emotional non-attachment deepens. The mind becomes less afraid of emotions themselves. Many people fear certain emotions so strongly that they try to avoid situations that might trigger them. They avoid difficult conversations because they fear anger. They avoid vulnerability because they fear sadness. They avoid challenges because they fear anxiety. But when someone learns that emotions can pass naturally without being clung to, that fear weakens. The mind becomes more open to life. Emotions are no longer enemies to avoid. They are experiences that move through awareness. This openness increases emotional resilience. The mind trusts its ability to navigate emotional experiences without becoming overwhelmed. Another important aspect of this practice involves gratitude for positive emotions. Non-attachment applies not only to painful emotions, but also to pleasant ones. Joy, excitement, and happiness are beautiful experiences, but clinging to them can also create suffering. When the mind becomes attached to pleasant feelings, it begins fearing their disappearance. It tries to hold on to them, extend them, or recreate them repeatedly. But pleasant emotions follow the same natural cycle as difficult ones. They arise, stay for a while, and eventually fade. Non-attachment allows these positive emotions to be appreciated fully without grasping. The mind enjoys them while they are present and releases them when they pass. This balanced relationship with emotions creates deep inner harmony. The mind is no longer pushed and pulled constantly by emotional waves. It remains steady while emotions move naturally. This steadiness does not eliminate feeling. In fact, it often allows emotions to be experienced more deeply and honestly, because when the mind is not trying to control emotions, it becomes fully present with them. Joy becomes richer, sadness becomes softer. Sadness becomes softer, anger becomes clearer, fear becomes manageable. Every emotion becomes part of the natural movement of life rather than a force that destabilizes the mind. Over time, emotional non-attachment creates a peaceful relationship with the inner world. Thoughts continue appearing, emotions continue arising, but the mind no longer clings to them tightly. They flow through awareness, like rivers moving across a landscape. And as they move, the deeper ground of awareness remains calm, steady, and unshaken. And as the mind begins practicing emotional non-attachment, another quiet realization slowly becomes visible. Emotions come and go like waves, yet something deeper inside remains steady. Feelings rise, thoughts appear, and experiences unfold, but awareness learns not to cling to them. Stability begins growing naturally because the mind is no longer fighting every emotional movement. But even when the mind learns not to cling to emotions, another powerful force still has the ability to disturb inner balance: the movement of time inside the mind. Many emotional struggles are not caused by what is happening right now. They are created by what the mind is remembering or predicting. A memory returns from years ago, and suddenly sadness appears again. A mistake from the past replays in the mind as if it happened yesterday. Words someone spoke long ago return with fresh emotional weight. The body is sitting peacefully in the present moment, yet the mind has traveled somewhere else entirely. And as the mind travels into the past, regret begins forming. Thoughts appear, asking questions that can never be answered. Why did that happen? Why did I say that? What if things had gone differently? The mind circles around these questions again and again, hoping to change something that has already passed. But the past cannot be changed by thinking about it repeatedly. Still, the mind continues replaying these memories as if searching for a different ending. And when the mind is not wandering into the past, it often moves in the opposite direction. It travels into the future. The mind begins imagining situations that have not yet happened. It predicts outcomes, constructs possible disasters, and prepares for problems that may never appear. A conversation tomorrow becomes a source of anxiety today. A future decision becomes a mental burden long before the moment arrives. The mind creates entire scenarios about events that have not yet unfolded. In these imagined futures, fear grows. But something important is often forgotten during these mental journeys. The body is still here, breathing, existing in the present moment. Right now, in this exact moment, the feared situation may not be happening at all. The regret from the past may not exist anymore. Yet the mind continues creating emotional reactions, as if those experiences are happening again. This movement away from the present moment is one of the most powerful sources of psychological instability, because the mind becomes trapped in time rather than resting in reality. Buddhist teachings reveal a simple but profound insight. Peace exists most naturally in the present moment, not because the present moment is always perfect, but because most psychological suffering is created by the mind's relationship with time. When the mind returns to the present, much of that suffering dissolves naturally. This is why mindfulness places such deep importance on the discipline of returning to the present moment. The word discipline may sound strict, but in this context it means gentle consistency. The mind will wander, that is its nature. Memories will appear, plans will arise, thoughts will travel into past and future countless times throughout the day. Mindfulness does not try to prevent this completely. Instead, it teaches the mind to return. Again and again, each time awareness notices that the mind has wandered, it gently guides attention back to what is happening now. The breath moving through the body, the sensation of sitting or standing, the sounds surrounding the environment, the subtle feeling of life unfolding in this moment. This return may seem small, but its effects are powerful. Every time the mind returns to the present, it weakens the habit of wandering into unnecessary suffering. This practice slowly trains the mind to stay closer to reality rather than imagination. The present moment has a unique quality. It contains direct experience. In the present moment, the mind does not need to guess what is happening. It can see, hear, feel, and observe clearly. But when the mind travels into the past or future, it begins operating with incomplete information. Memories are often distorted by emotion. Predictions are often influenced by fear. Because of this, the mind's relationship with time can easily create confusion. Returning to the present restores clarity. Clarity reduces emotional turbulence. Another reason the present moment brings stability is because it simplifies experience. When the mind thinks about the future, it often tries to manage countless possibilities at once. What if this happens? What if that goes wrong? What if everything fails? These imagined scenarios multiply quickly, creating a sense of overwhelm. But the present moment contains only one situation at a time. Right now, right here. The mind only needs to respond to what is actually occurring. This simplicity makes life easier to navigate. Instead of solving problems that may never happen, the mind focuses on what can truly be addressed. Another subtle change appears when someone practices returning to the present moment regularly. The pace of thinking begins slowing down. The mind becomes less frantic. Instead of jumping from one thought to another endlessly, awareness begins resting in direct experience. The feeling of breathing becomes noticeable. The warmth of sunlight becomes clearer. The sound of wind or distant voices becomes part of the moment. Life becomes richer when attention returns to the present. Many people spend much of their lives thinking about life rather than experiencing it. They plan, analyze, remember, and predict constantly. But in doing so, they miss the quiet beauty of the moment unfolding before them. Mindfulness reopens this connection. The present moment becomes alive again. Another benefit of returning to the present moment is emotional grounding. When strong emotions appear, the mind often becomes lost inside the story behind the emotion. Anger focuses on the event that caused it. Fear focuses on the imagined danger. Sadness focuses on the loss or memory behind it. But when awareness returns to the present, attention shifts away from the story. The mind begins noticing the physical sensations connected to the emotion. The tightness in the chest, the warmth in the face, the movement of breath. Observing these sensations gently reconnects awareness with the body. The body always exists in the present moment. By focusing on bodily sensations, the mind naturally returns to now. This grounding reduces emotional intensity. The story behind the emotion fades into the background. Another powerful discovery appears through this practice. Many problems that seem overwhelming when imagined become manageable when faced directly in the present. The mind may fear a conversation for days, but when the moment of conversation arrives, the situation often becomes simpler than expected. The imagined difficulty dissolves once the real experience begins. This happens because imagination often exaggerates challenges. Reality tends to be more balanced. By returning attention to the present moment, the mind avoids becoming trapped in exaggerated fears. Another aspect of this teaching involves acceptance. The present moment cannot be changed instantly. It can only be experienced and responded to. When the mind resists the present moment, tension grows. But when the mind accepts the moment as it is, clarity appears. From that clarity, wise action becomes possible. Acceptance does not mean passivity. It means seeing reality clearly before responding. The discipline of returning to the present moment strengthens this clarity. Over time, the mind begins spending more energy in awareness rather than imagination. This shift creates deep emotional stability, because the present moment is usually less threatening than the stories the mind creates about past or future. Even during difficult circumstances, the present moment often contains elements of safety, breath, and awareness. Returning to these elements restores balance. Eventually, the mind begins understanding something profound. Life only unfolds in the present moment. The past exists as memory, the future exists as possibility. But reality always happens now. When attention rests in the present, life becomes easier to meet with calmness and strength. And within that calm presence, the mind discovers a quiet place where suffering has far less room to grow. And as the discipline of returning to the present moment becomes stronger, the mind begins discovering something important about emotional stability. When attention rests in the present, reactions slow down. Thoughts no longer rush forward uncontrollably. Awareness gains enough space to observe situations clearly before responding. But even when the mind becomes grounded in the present moment, certain situations still test inner calm more than others. Conflict is one of those moments. Few experiences disturb emotional balance as quickly as conflict with another person. A sharp tone, a harsh comment, a misunderstanding, or a moment of disrespect can ignite strong reactions almost instantly. The body tightens, the heart rate increases, and the mind begins preparing arguments or defenses. In these moments, the instinctive response of the mind is often judgment. The other person becomes the problem. The mind quickly labels them as rude, selfish, unfair, or hostile. Once this label appears, emotional tension grows stronger. The mind begins defending its position and protecting its sense of identity. Conflict then becomes a battle. Each person focuses on proving themselves right and the other person wrong. But Buddhist wisdom introduces a very different perspective during moments of conflict. Instead of immediately judging the person in front of you, the mind gently asks a deeper question. What suffering might be behind this behavior? This question shifts the entire emotional landscape. Because when someone behaves aggressively, defensively, or harshly, it is often not simply an act of cruelty. In many cases, it is an expression of inner struggle. People rarely hurt others when they feel peaceful inside. Harsh words often come from frustration. Impatience often comes from stress. Anger often comes from pain. Understanding this does not excuse harmful behavior, but it reveals the deeper human condition behind it. Every person carries invisible burdens. A person who appears calm on the surface may be carrying worry about their family. Someone who seems impatient may be exhausted from responsibilities others cannot see. Someone who reacts defensively may be protecting themselves from fear or insecurity. When conflict appears, these hidden struggles often rise to the surface. Without awareness, the mind reacts to the behavior itself. But with compassion, the mind begins seeing beyond the behavior. This change in perception transforms emotional reactions. Instead of responding with immediate anger, the mind pauses with curiosity. Why might this person be reacting this way? What pressure might they be under? What fear or frustration might be influencing their words? This perspective softens emotional reactivity because compassion replaces judgment. Compassion does not mean agreeing with harmful behavior. It means recognizing the humanity behind it. This recognition allows the mind to remain calm even when conflict arises. Calmness during conflict is one of the strongest forms of emotional power. When someone remains calm, the emotional chain reaction of conflict begins breaking. If one person raises their voice and the other responds with equal anger, the situation escalates quickly. But if one person remains steady, the emotional momentum weakens. The calm presence becomes like a stable anchor during a storm. Another important effect of compassion during conflict is clarity. When anger dominates the mind, perception becomes distorted. The mind focuses only on winning the argument. Listening becomes difficult. Understanding the other person's perspective becomes almost impossible. But when compassion is present, the mind remains open. Instead of reacting defensively, it becomes capable of hearing what the other person is actually saying. Sometimes conflict arises from simple misunderstanding. Words may be interpreted differently than intended. Tone may be misread. Situations may be viewed from different perspectives. Compassion creates the space necessary for these misunderstandings to be recognized. Instead of attacking each other's positions, people begin exploring the situation together. Another powerful aspect of compassion during conflict is emotional resilience. When someone judges another person harshly, their own emotional state becomes fragile. Any additional negative behavior from the other person increases anger. But when the mind views the situation through compassion, emotional stability becomes stronger. The behavior may still be unpleasant, but it no longer feels like a personal attack on identity. It becomes an expression of the other person's internal condition. This perspective protects inner peace. Compassion also encourages patience. Conflict rarely resolves instantly. People need time to calm down, reflect, and communicate more clearly. If the mind demands immediate resolution, frustration grows. But when compassion is present, patience becomes easier. The mind understands that emotions often need time to settle before clarity appears. This patience prevents unnecessary escalation. Another important dimension of compassion during conflict involves self-awareness. While observing the other person's emotions, the mind also becomes aware of its own internal reactions. Anger may still arise, defensiveness may still appear, but awareness notices these reactions without immediately acting on them. This awareness creates choice. Instead of reacting automatically, the mind can decide how to respond. This ability to choose responses is the essence of emotional maturity. Without awareness, reactions happen instantly. With awareness, responses become intentional. Compassion strengthens this awareness. Because when the mind is focused on understanding rather than attacking, it naturally becomes more attentive to the emotional environment. Another beautiful result of compassion during conflict is the possibility of transformation. When someone expects hostility and instead receives calm understanding, the entire dynamic changes. The other person may begin softening. Their defensiveness may decrease. They may feel heard instead of attacked. This does not happen in every situation, but it happens often enough to reveal the power of compassionate presence. Conflict sometimes dissolves simply because one person refuses to feed the cycle of anger. Another important benefit of compassion is that it protects the mind from carrying resentment long after the conflict ends. When someone reacts with judgment and anger, the emotional memory of the conflict can linger for days or weeks. The mind replays the argument repeatedly, strengthening negative feelings. But when compassion shapes the response, the emotional impact becomes lighter. The mind understands that the conflict was not simply about personal hostility. It was about human beings struggling with their own emotions. This understanding allows the mind to release the experience more easily. Another subtle shift appears when compassion becomes a natural response during conflict. The mind stops expecting perfect emotional behavior from others. It recognizes that everyone is learning how to manage their emotions. Some people have practiced emotional awareness deeply. Others have never been taught how to handle frustration or fear constructively. Understanding this difference prevents unrealistic expectations. Instead of demanding perfect behavior from everyone, the mind responds with wisdom about the diversity of human emotional development. This wisdom reduces disappointment. It also encourages personal responsibility. Instead of trying to control other people's reactions, the mind focuses on maintaining its own clarity and compassion. This focus strengthens emotional independence. Inner peace becomes less dependent on how others behave. Over time, the practice of compassion during conflict changes the entire experience of difficult interactions. Situations that once felt threatening become manageable. Arguments that once escalated quickly now move more slowly. The mind learns to listen, observe, and respond with calm steadiness. Conflict still occurs because disagreement is a natural part of human relationships, but the emotional intensity decreases. Understanding replaces hostility, curiosity replaces accusation, compassion replaces judgment, and within that compassionate awareness, the mind remains balanced even when others struggle with their emotions. The conflict may still exist, but the inner world remains calm, and as compassion begins softening the mind during moments of conflict, another important realization quietly appears. Much of the emotional turbulence people experience is not only created by disagreements with others, it is also created by the constant movement of approval and disapproval in everyday life. Praise lifts the mood. Criticism lowers it. A small success brings excitement. A small failure brings disappointment. The mind moves up and down like a leaf carried by changing winds. But Buddhist teachings invite the mind to look deeper at this pattern. Why does a few words of praise create happiness so quickly? Why does a small criticism disturb the mind so deeply? Why does success create such excitement, while loss creates such fear? The answer often lies in the way the mind attaches its sense of worth to external reactions. When approval becomes the measure of value, praise feels like validation. When disapproval appears, the mind interprets it as rejection. The emotional balance of the mind becomes tied to the opinions and circumstances surrounding it. This attachment creates instability. Because the world constantly changes, Buddhist philosophy describes this movement through a teaching known as the 8 worldly winds. These winds move through every human life, shaping experiences in ways that cannot always be controlled. Praise and blame arrive unexpectedly. Gain and loss appear throughout different stages of life. Pleasure and pain alternate naturally. Fame and obscurity rise and fall like tides. These forces are not personal punishments or rewards. They are natural movements within the human world. Yet the mind often reacts to each one intensely. When praise arrives, the mind celebrates. It feels elevated and important. Confidence grows quickly, and the mind may begin expecting this approval to continue. But when blame appears, the emotional tone changes instantly. The same mind that felt confident moments before may suddenly feel defensive or wounded. The reaction can feel powerful, even when the criticism is small. This constant swing between praise and blame creates emotional exhaustion. The mind becomes dependent on approval to feel secure. Every compliment feels necessary. Every criticism feels threatening. But Buddhist wisdom reveals that emotional stability becomes possible when the mind stops chasing praise and fearing blame. This does not mean ignoring feedback or becoming indifferent to the opinions of others. It means seeing praise and criticism as temporary wins rather than permanent truths. Praise often reflects someone's perspective at a particular moment. Criticism often reflects another perspective shaped by different experiences. Both can contain useful information, but neither should define the entire identity of a person. When praise appears, it is easy for the mind to inflate the self-image. The mind may begin thinking, "I am better than others," or "I must maintain this approval at all costs." This attachment creates pressure. The mind becomes anxious about losing the positive image others have created. But when praise is viewed with emotional neutrality, the mind remains balanced. It appreciates kind words without becoming dependent on them. It recognizes that approval can change as circumstances change. The same principle applies to criticism. Criticism can feel uncomfortable because it touches the ego. The mind immediately wants to defend itself. But when criticism is observed calmly, it can be examined without emotional collapse. Some criticism may be unfair, some may contain truth. Emotional neutrality allows the mind to distinguish between these possibilities. Instead of reacting defensively, the mind asks a simple question: is there something useful to learn here? If the answer is yes, the feedback becomes an opportunity for growth. If the answer is no, the criticism can be released without carrying emotional weight. This balanced approach protects inner peace. Because the mind no longer depends on constant approval for stability, another pair of worldly winds involves gain and loss. Life naturally contains periods of acquisition and periods of letting go. Money may increase at certain times and decrease at others. Opportunities may appear and later disappear. Relationships may begin and eventually change. When the mind becomes attached to gain, it fears loss intensely. But loss is a natural part of life's movement. Everything that appears eventually changes. Understanding this truth reduces emotional shock when loss occurs. Instead of interpreting loss as personal failure, the mind sees it as part of life's rhythm. The same rhythm that brings gain will eventually bring loss again. And the same rhythm that brings loss will later create space for new gain. This perspective creates resilience. The mind no longer collapses when circumstances change. Another pair of worldly winds involves pleasure and pain. Pleasant experiences are often welcomed eagerly. Comfort, enjoyment, and happiness feel natural and desirable. But the mind sometimes becomes attached to pleasure so strongly that it begins fearing its disappearance. This fear creates subtle tension. The mind tries to preserve pleasurable experiences indefinitely, but life constantly moves. Pleasure cannot remain forever. Pain will eventually appear in some form. Pain may come through physical discomfort, emotional difficulty, or challenging situations. When pain appears, the mind may react with resistance. It may think something has gone wrong, but Buddhist teachings explain that both pleasure and pain are natural experiences within life. Neither one remains permanently. Pleasure arrives, stays for a while, and fades. Pain appears, stays for a while, and fades as well. Emotional neutrality allows the mind to experience both without becoming overwhelmed. Pleasure can be appreciated without clinging. Pain can be experienced without despair. Another pair of worldly winds involves fame and obscurity. Recognition and reputation can influence the mind strongly. When people receive attention, admiration, or social status, the mind may feel elevated. But fame is fragile. Public opinion changes quickly. Recognition may disappear as easily as it appeared. When the mind becomes attached to fame, the loss of attention can feel painful. Obscurity, on the other hand, may feel like invisibility. The mind may fear being unnoticed or unrecognized. But both fame and obscurity are simply different conditions within social life. Neither determines the true worth of a person. Emotional neutrality toward these forces protects inner stability. A person who remains balanced during recognition and invisibility alike possesses a quiet strength. They do not rely on external attention to feel valuable. Their sense of identity comes from deeper awareness rather than social validation. Practicing neutrality toward the 8 worldly winds does not mean becoming emotionally numb. It means understanding that these forces constantly change. When the mind stops attaching its identity to them, emotional freedom grows. Praise may come today and criticism tomorrow. Gain may appear this year and loss the next. Pleasure may visit in one moment and pain in another. Fame may rise and fall across different seasons of life, but the inner awareness that observes these movements can remain steady. This steadiness becomes the foundation of true stability. A person who understands the movement of these winds is less easily shaken by circumstances. They appreciate success without arrogance. They face criticism without collapse. They experience pleasure with gratitude. They endure pain with patience. Their identity no longer swings wildly between these external forces. Instead, it rests quietly in awareness. From that awareness comes a calm confidence that does not depend on temporary conditions. Life continues changing, but the mind remains grounded. The winds continue moving, but the inner world remains still. And as the mind slowly learns to remain steady through praise and criticism, gain and loss, pleasure and pain, another quiet realization begins appearing beneath the surface of awareness. Much of the turbulence people experience in life does not only come from changing circumstances, it often comes from the mind's refusal to accept those circumstances. The world moves in ways that cannot always be controlled. Situations appear that the mind would never choose. Unexpected events unfold, plans collapse, opportunities disappear, health changes, relationships shift. Life presents moments that no amount of effort can immediately correct. And when these moments appear, the mind often begins fighting reality itself. It insists that things should be different. It repeats the same question again and again. Why did this happen? Why now? Why to me? These questions create resistance, and resistance often becomes heavier than the situation itself. Because the mind is not only experiencing the difficulty, it is also struggling against the fact that the difficulty exists at all. This struggle creates a second layer of suffering. The original problem may already be painful, but the mind's refusal to accept it creates additional emotional weight. Buddhist teachings describe this clearly. Pain is part of life, but resistance to pain often multiplies suffering. This is where the practice of radical acceptance begins to reveal its power. Radical acceptance does not mean liking every situation. It does not mean pretending that hardship is pleasant or that injustice is acceptable. Instead, radical acceptance means acknowledging reality exactly as it is in the present moment without arguing with it internally. Something difficult has happened. That fact exists. Fighting against the existence of the fact does not change it. But accepting the fact creates mental space, and within that space, peace can still exist. To understand this more deeply, it helps to observe how the mind reacts when faced with something unwanted. Imagine a sudden change in circumstances. A plan fails unexpectedly. A relationship becomes strained. An opportunity disappears after months of preparation. The first wave of emotion may be disappointment or sadness. These reactions are natural, but then the mind often begins creating resistance. It says this should not have happened. It replays the event again and again. It searches endlessly for someone or something to blame. It imagines alternative scenarios where things turned out differently. All of these mental movements are attempts to reject the reality that already exists. But while the mind is fighting reality, the present moment continues unfolding. Energy becomes trapped in frustration rather than used for understanding the situation clearly. Energy becomes trapped in frustration rather than used for understanding the situation clearly. Radical acceptance interrupts this cycle. Instead of continuing the internal battle, the mind pauses. It acknowledges the reality directly. This has happened. This situation exists. It may not be what I wanted, but it is what is here right now. This acknowledgement releases enormous psychological pressure. Because the mind stops trying to reverse time, the energy that was previously used to resist reality becomes available for clarity. Clarity allows wiser responses. Another important aspect of acceptance is recognizing the difference between what can be changed and what cannot. Some situations require action. If a mistake has been made, it can be corrected. If a conflict appears, it can be addressed through communication. If a problem arises, solutions may be possible. But some conditions cannot be changed immediately. Certain events have already occurred. Certain outcomes are beyond personal control. Certain realities must simply be faced. Radical acceptance helps the mind recognize this difference. Instead of wasting energy fighting what cannot be changed, attention turns toward what can still be influenced. This shift creates strength. Because the mind is no longer exhausted by resistance, it becomes focused and steady. Acceptance also allows emotional healing. When the mind refuses to accept a painful reality, the emotional wound remains open. The mind keeps touching the wound repeatedly through rumination, but when acceptance appears, the mind begins allowing the experience to settle. Sadness may still be present, but it moves gently instead of violently. Acceptance creates space for grief, reflection, and eventual renewal. Another powerful element of radical acceptance involves humility. The human mind often wants to believe it can control every outcome through effort or intelligence, but life contains many forces that operate beyond individual control. Weather changes unexpectedly, economic conditions shift, other people make decisions that affect the course of events. Health and aging follow natural processes. Recognizing these forces does not weaken the mind, it strengthens it, because the mind stops trying to dominate every aspect of life. Instead, it learns to cooperate with reality. This cooperation creates peace. When the mind flows with circumstances rather than fighting them constantly, emotional balance becomes easier to maintain. Another benefit of acceptance is clarity in decision-making. When someone refuses to accept a situation, their perception becomes distorted. They may deny facts, exaggerate possibilities, or cling to unrealistic hopes. But when acceptance appears, perception becomes honest. The mind sees the situation clearly without filters of denial or fantasy. This honesty allows wiser choices. A person can respond intelligently rather than react emotionally. Acceptance does not remove challenges, but it removes confusion, and clarity is often the first step toward meaningful progress. Another important insight emerges through this practice. Acceptance and effort can exist together. Many people believe accepting a situation means giving up. But acceptance simply means acknowledging reality before deciding how to respond. For example, if someone faces a difficult health condition, denying the diagnosis does not improve the situation. But accepting the condition allows them to focus on treatment, care, and adaptation. Acceptance becomes the foundation for constructive action. Without acceptance, action becomes scattered and ineffective. Another dimension of radical acceptance involves emotional freedom. When the mind stops resisting reality, the emotional intensity of situations often decreases. A painful event still carries weight, but the added burden of internal resistance disappears. This creates a lighter emotional experience. The mind becomes capable of carrying difficulties without collapsing under them. This resilience grows gradually. Each time the mind practices acceptance during a challenging moment, it becomes stronger. Over time, acceptance transforms how the mind relates to uncertainty. Instead of fearing every unexpected change, the mind becomes flexible. It learns that life will always contain surprises, some pleasant, some difficult, but none permanent. This understanding reduces anxiety. The mind no longer demands that life follow a perfect script. It becomes willing to meet whatever unfolds. Another beautiful result of radical acceptance is gratitude. When the mind stops focusing entirely on what is wrong, it begins noticing what is still present. Even during difficult circumstances, small moments of peace can still exist. Breath continues, nature continues, human connection continues. Awareness itself continues. Acceptance opens the door to these quiet sources of stability. Without acceptance, the mind becomes so focused on what it dislikes that it cannot see what remains good. But with acceptance, perception becomes wider. Life reveals layers of experience that resistance once hid. Eventually, radical acceptance becomes more than a practice. It becomes a natural way of meeting life. When challenges appear, the mind does not immediately panic or resist. It pauses. It breathes. It acknowledges the reality of the moment. And from that calm acknowledgement, wisdom begins guiding the next step. Life will always contain situations that cannot be changed, but the mind can always choose how it meets those situations. And when acceptance replaces resistance, peace becomes possible even in the middle of difficulty. And as the mind begins accepting situations that cannot be changed, another quiet strength starts forming beneath the surface of awareness. Acceptance removes the inner battle against reality, but life still continues moving with unexpected challenges. Storms still arrive, difficult moments still appear, circumstances still shift in ways no one can fully predict. Acceptance creates peace with what exists, but resilience determines how the mind moves through what exists. This is where another powerful insight from Buddhist wisdom appears. Stability does not mean becoming rigid. True stability often requires flexibility. Many people believe strength means resisting pressure at all costs. They imagine resilience as standing firm like a stone wall against every challenge. But life's storms are often too powerful for rigid resistance. When something rigid faces enough pressure, it eventually cracks. Nature quietly reveals a different model of strength. During powerful winds and storms, some trees fall while others survive. The trees that break are often the ones that refuse to bend. Their stiffness becomes their weakness. But bamboo behaves differently. When strong winds arrive, bamboo bends with the storm. Its flexible body moves with the pressure rather than resisting it completely. The storm may push it nearly to the ground, yet when the winds pass, the bamboo slowly rises again. It does not break because it knows how to bend. This simple image reveals an important lesson about emotional resilience. The human mind often suffers when it becomes rigid during adversity. Rigid thinking demands that life follows certain expectations. Rigid identity insists on always being strong, always being in control, always succeeding without difficulty. But life does not follow rigid rules. Situations change, plans fail, unexpected challenges appear. When the mind refuses to bend during these moments, emotional stress increases quickly, frustration grows, fear intensifies. The mind feels as if it is being forced into situations it cannot handle. But when the mind adopts the bamboo mindset, the entire relationship with adversity changes. Instead of resisting pressure with rigid force, awareness allows flexibility. Flexibility does not mean weakness. It means adapting to reality while preserving inner stability. A flexible mind can adjust when circumstances change. If a plan fails, it finds another direction. If expectations collapse, it reassesses with clarity rather than panic. If challenges appear, it responds with patience rather than despair. This adaptability protects emotional balance. Another important aspect of the bamboo mindset is humility. Rigid minds often believe they must always remain strong without showing vulnerability. They interpret bending as failure. But true resilience often requires acknowledging difficulty honestly. A person practicing the bamboo mindset can admit when something is painful. They can acknowledge fear, uncertainty, or confusion without feeling ashamed. This honesty allows emotional pressure to move through the mind rather than becoming trapped inside. Bending allows the storm to pass. Pretending the storm does not exist only increases internal tension. Another important element of flexibility involves perspective. When adversity appears, the mind often zooms in on the problem so intensely that it forgets the larger picture of life. A single failure may feel like the end of all progress. A moment of rejection may feel like permanent loss. But the bamboo mindset encourages a wider perspective. Life is not defined by one moment. Just as storms pass in nature, difficult periods eventually pass in human experience as well. Flexibility allows the mind to move through temporary hardship without believing it will last forever. This perspective prevents emotional collapse. Another benefit of the bamboo mindset is creativity. Rigid thinking limits the ability to explore new possibilities. When one path closes, the rigid mind becomes trapped in disappointment. But the flexible mind begins looking for alternative paths. If one opportunity disappears, another may emerge in an unexpected place. Flexibility encourages curiosity instead of despair. Curiosity opens doors that rigid thinking cannot see. Another important dimension of this mindset involves patience. Storms rarely disappear instantly. Adversity often requires time to move through. A flexible mind understands this rhythm. Instead of demanding immediate resolution, it allows life to unfold gradually. Patience reduces emotional pressure. It reminds the mind that change continues even when solutions are not immediately visible. Another beautiful quality of bamboo is its quiet strength. From a distance, bamboo appears delicate. Its thin stalks and gentle movements suggest fragility. But bamboo forests survive storms that destroy heavier trees. Their strength comes from adaptability rather than rigid force. The same principle applies to emotional resilience. A person who remains calm and flexible during adversity may appear gentle on the surface, but their inner strength is profound. They do not collapse when difficulties appear. They adjust and they observe. They respond thoughtfully. This quiet resilience allows them to recover faster than those who resist every change with stubborn rigidity. Another lesson from the bamboo mindset involves emotional recovery. Even the strongest mind will experience moments of bending. There will be days when energy feels low, moments when doubt appears, situations when the mind feels overwhelmed temporarily. Flexibility allows these moments without turning them into permanent conclusions. Just as bamboo bends deeply during a storm and later returns upright, the mind can experience temporary emotional dips without believing it has lost its strength. Recovery becomes part of the natural rhythm of resilience. Another aspect of this mindset involves releasing perfectionism. Rigid minds often expect themselves to handle every challenge flawlessly. When they fall short of these expectations, they become harsh toward themselves. But flexibility allows mistakes without destroying self-respect. A person practicing the bamboo mindset understands that learning often involves setbacks. Growth sometimes includes periods of uncertainty. These experiences do not define failure, they define development. This understanding creates self-compassion. Another benefit of flexibility is emotional openness. Rigid minds often protect themselves by shutting down emotionally during difficult situations. They become guarded and distant. But flexible minds remain open. They allow themselves to feel, to reflect, and to learn from each experience. This openness deepens wisdom. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to understand life more clearly. Another important dimension of the bamboo mindset involves trust in life's cycles. Nature moves through seasons. Periods of growth are followed by periods of rest. Storms are followed by calm skies. The same rhythm appears in human life. Moments of difficulty are often followed by new possibilities. But when the mind becomes rigid during adversity, it forgets these natural cycles. Flexibility restores this trust. It reminds the mind that no storm lasts forever. This trust reduces fear during difficult periods. Over time, the bamboo mindset becomes a natural response to life's unpredictability. When challenges appear, the mind does not panic. It adjusts, it observes, it bends without breaking, and when the storm passes, the mind rises again with quiet strength. Life will always bring winds of change, but a flexible mind remains rooted. And within that flexibility, true stability quietly grows. And as the bamboo mindset begins shaping the way the mind moves through adversity, another quiet pattern slowly becomes visible. Flexibility protects the mind during storms, allowing it to bend without breaking. Yet many emotional storms do not come only from external difficulties. They come from a more subtle place inside the heart. The desire to be understood, it appears quietly in everyday life. Someone explains their intentions carefully, hoping the other person will see their sincerity. Someone shares their perspective during a disagreement, hoping their words will finally be recognized. Someone tries again and again to clarify what they meant, believing that if others could only understand the truth of their feelings, the tension would disappear. But sometimes, understanding never arrives. Words are spoken clearly, yet they are still misinterpreted. Explanations are offered patiently, yet they are dismissed or misunderstood. The mind repeats the same effort again, trying to fix the gap between what is felt inside and what others perceive. And when that gap refuses to close, frustration begins growing. The mind feels invisible. It feels as though its intentions have been erased or replaced with assumptions that do not reflect reality. A quiet ache begins forming in the heart, because the mind believes that peace can only exist once others finally understand. But Buddhist teachings gently reveal a different path toward emotional stability. Peace does not require everyone to understand you. This realization may feel uncomfortable at first because the human mind naturally seeks recognition. From childhood onward, people learn to express themselves, hoping others will respond with agreement or empathy. Validation feels comforting because it confirms that one's experience has been seen and acknowledged. But when inner peace becomes dependent on validation, the mind becomes fragile. It begins waiting for approval before feeling secure. Every misunderstanding becomes a disturbance. Every disagreement becomes a personal wound. The mind starts measuring its worth through the reactions of others. And since human understanding is often incomplete, this dependency creates constant emotional turbulence. People see the world through their own experiences, beliefs, and emotional states. Even when someone speaks honestly, the listener may interpret those words through a completely different perspective. Two people can witness the same event and remember it differently. Two people can hear the same explanation and draw opposite conclusions. Understanding is influenced by countless invisible factors. Expecting perfect understanding from others therefore creates endless disappointment. This is where the practice of detachment begins to restore stability. Detachment from the need to be understood does not mean becoming silent or suppressing one's voice. Communication still remains valuable and meaningful, but the emotional outcome no longer depends on whether the listener fully accepts the explanation. The mind speaks with honesty, and then it releases the need to control how the message is received. This release creates freedom because the mind no longer becomes trapped in endless attempts to correct misunderstandings. Instead of repeating the same explanation repeatedly, awareness recognizes that some people may never fully see the situation from the same perspective. This acceptance removes enormous emotional pressure. The mind stops fighting invisible battles for validation. Another important aspect of this practice involves identity. When the mind depends on others to understand it, identity becomes external. Self-worth becomes tied to how accurately others interpret personal intentions. If someone misunderstands your actions, the mind feels attacked. If someone questions your motives, the mind feels diminished. But when self-worth arises from inner awareness rather than external validation, misunderstandings lose their destructive power. Someone may still disagree with your choices. Someone may still interpret your words incorrectly. But their misunderstanding does not define your character. You know your intentions clearly. That clarity becomes enough. Another important benefit of detaching from the need to be understood is emotional quietness. When the mind feels misunderstood, it often enters a cycle of mental replay. Conversations are revisited again and again. The mind imagines different ways the explanation could have been delivered. It constructs new arguments that might convince the other person. This endless replay drains emotional energy, but when detachment appears, the cycle stops. The mind recognizes that its truth does not need to be defended endlessly. Once something has been expressed sincerely, the rest is beyond control. Releasing the need to correct every misunderstanding allows the mind to rest. Another dimension of this practice involves humility. Not every misunderstanding is entirely caused by others. Sometimes words are unclear, sometimes emotions distort communication, sometimes the mind itself struggles to express complex feelings accurately. Recognizing this possibility encourages patience. Instead of insisting that others must understand perfectly, the mind allows room for imperfection in communication. This humility softens interactions. It reduces the pressure placed on every conversation. Another powerful shift appears when someone practices this detachment regularly. Silence begins to feel peaceful rather than threatening. Previously, silence during misunderstanding might feel uncomfortable. The mind may believe that if it stops explaining, others will assume the worst. But when inner confidence grows, silence becomes a form of strength. Not every accusation requires defense. Not every misunderstanding requires correction. Sometimes allowing the misunderstanding to exist peacefully creates more calm than fighting against it. This silence protects emotional stability. Another insight appears through this practice. People often understand others only when they are ready to understand. No amount of explanation can force someone to see something they are not yet willing or able to see. Timing, emotional maturity, and personal experience all influence how understanding develops. Recognizing this truth prevents unnecessary struggle. The mind realizes that clarity sometimes arrives naturally with time. Until that moment arrives, forcing understanding only creates friction. Another benefit of detaching from the need to be understood is independence. The mind becomes less influenced by public opinion or social pressure. Decisions begin arising from personal values rather than the desire to gain approval. This independence strengthens inner confidence. A person who no longer depends on universal understanding can act according to conscience rather than popularity. Another aspect of this freedom involves emotional privacy. Not every thought or feeling needs to be explained to everyone. Some experiences are deeply personal. Some intentions are better understood through actions rather than words. Detachment allows the mind to keep certain truths quietly within awareness without feeling the need to broadcast them constantly. This privacy protects inner peace. Over time, this practice changes the emotional atmosphere of relationships. Conversations become calmer because the mind no longer fights desperately to be understood. Instead, it shares openly and listens patiently. If agreement appears, it is welcomed. If misunderstanding remains, it is accepted without hostility. This attitude reduces conflict significantly, because many arguments are fueled not by the original disagreement, but by the insistence that the other person must acknowledge one's perspective completely. Removing this insistence creates space for mutual respect, even without full agreement. Another subtle transformation appears within the mind itself. Confidence becomes quieter and deeper. The mind does not constantly search for recognition. It does not panic when misunderstood. It knows its own intentions clearly, and that knowledge becomes enough. This quiet confidence is powerful because it allows a person to move through life with authenticity rather than constant self-defense. They speak honestly when necessary. They remain silent when explanation is no longer useful. They allow others to form their own opinions without feeling threatened by them. And within that freedom, emotional turbulence slowly fades. Misunderstandings may still occur, but the mind remains steady. Because inner peace no longer depends on universal agreement, it rests quietly within awareness itself. And as the mind slowly releases the need to be understood by everyone, another subtle tension begins revealing itself beneath the surface. Even when the world becomes quieter, another voice can still create turbulence, the voice inside the mind. Many people believe their greatest struggles come from external criticism, but often the harshest judgment does not come from others. It comes from the mind observing its own reactions. An emotion appears unexpectedly. Anger rises during a conversation. Fear appears during uncertainty. Sadness surfaces without warning, and almost immediately another reaction follows. The mind begins criticizing itself for feeling that way. Why am I reacting like this? I should be stronger than this. I should not feel this way. Something must be wrong with me. In this moment, the mind creates a second layer of suffering. The original emotion may already be uncomfortable, but the judgment directed toward the emotion intensifies the experience. Instead of simply feeling the emotion, the mind begins attacking itself for having the emotion. This pattern is extremely common. Someone feels anxious before an important event, and instead of allowing the nervousness to pass naturally, the mind begins criticizing itself for lacking confidence. Someone feels anger during a difficult conversation, and instead of observing the anger calmly, the mind begins labeling itself as weak or out of control. Someone experiences sadness, and instead of holding that sadness gently, the mind creates shame around it. This secondary reaction often hurts more than the original emotion. Buddhist teachings reveal a compassionate alternative. Instead of reacting to emotions with judgment, awareness learns to observe them gently. This practice is known as gentle self-observation. Gentle observation begins with a simple shift in attitude. Instead of treating the mind like an enemy that must be corrected constantly, awareness begins treating the mind like something that can be understood. Emotions become experiences to observe rather than problems to eliminate immediately. When anger appears, the mind does not instantly attack itself. It notices anger is present. When anxiety arises, awareness does not panic. It observes. Anxiety is here right now. When sadness appears, the mind does not label itself as weak. It simply recognizes the feeling. Sadness is moving through the heart. This shift may seem small, but it transforms the emotional experience completely. Because observation without judgment removes the second layer of suffering, the emotion is allowed to exist without being punished. To understand this more deeply, it helps to imagine how a compassionate teacher observes a student who is learning something difficult. The teacher does not scream when the student makes a mistake. They watch patiently, they guide gently. They understand that learning involves moments of confusion. The same kindness can be offered to the mind. Instead of demanding perfection from every emotional reaction, awareness begins observing the mind with curiosity. What is happening inside right now? What sensations are present in the body? What thoughts are appearing? This curiosity opens the door to understanding. Many emotional reactions become clearer once they are observed calmly. Anger may reveal a hidden feeling of hurt. Anxiety may reveal a desire for safety. Sadness may reveal the importance of something that was lost. Observation allows these deeper layers to appear without forcing them. Another important aspect of gentle self-observation is patience. Emotional patterns develop over many years. Habits of thinking and reacting become deeply rooted. Expecting the mind to change instantly often creates frustration, but patient observation allows transformation to happen gradually. Each moment of awareness strengthens the ability to observe without judgment. Another benefit of this practice is honesty. When the mind feels safe from harsh self-criticism, it becomes more willing to reveal its true feelings. Hidden fears, doubts, and insecurities can appear openly. Without judgment, these emotions lose much of their power. They are no longer secrets that must be hidden. They are no longer secrets that must be hidden. They become experiences that can be understood. Another important discovery appears through compassionate observation. Many emotional reactions are influenced by conditions that have nothing to do with weakness or failure. Fatigue can intensify irritability. Stress can amplify anxiety. Past experiences can shape current reactions. Recognizing these influences helps the mind see its reactions more clearly. Instead of labeling itself as flawed, the mind begins understanding the conditions that created the emotion. This understanding replaces judgment with wisdom. Another dimension of gentle observation involves physical awareness. Emotions often express themselves through the body. Tension appears in the shoulders, warmth rises in the face, breath becomes shallow, heartbeats become faster. Observing these sensations calmly reconnects awareness with the body. The mind realizes that emotions are not abstract enemies. They are natural responses moving through the physical system. Watching these sensations without judgment allows them to change more easily. Another beautiful effect of gentle observation is emotional softening. When the mind stops attacking itself for emotional reactions, the intensity of those reactions often decreases. Anger becomes easier to hold. Fear becomes less overwhelming. Sadness becomes more peaceful. This softening happens because resistance disappears. Without judgment, emotions move more freely through awareness. Another important shift appears in the relationship between identity and emotion. When the mind criticizes itself for emotional reactions, it often creates harsh labels. I am weak, I am too sensitive, I am not strong enough. These labels attach identity to temporary experiences. But gentle observation separates identity from emotion. Instead of saying, I am angry, the mind notices anger is present. Instead of saying, I am anxious, awareness observes anxiety is moving through. This language reflects a deeper truth. The mind is not the emotion, it is the space in which the emotion appears. Recognizing this distinction reduces self-judgment. Another powerful benefit of this practice is emotional resilience. When someone becomes skilled at observing emotions gently, they no longer fear those emotions as intensely. Anger can be experienced without losing control. Fear can be observed without panic. Sadness can be felt without shame. The mind trusts its ability to witness emotional movement without collapsing under it. This trust strengthens inner stability. Another insight appears as self-observation deepens. The mind begins recognizing how often it exaggerates its own reactions. A moment of frustration may feel overwhelming at first, but when observed calmly, the emotion often fades quickly. The mind realizes that emotional storms are often shorter than they appear. This realization reduces fear of future emotional experiences. Another beautiful result of compassionate observation is self-kindness. Many people offer kindness to others easily, but treat themselves with harsh criticism. Gentle observation restores balance. The same patience offered to a friend can be offered to oneself. Mistakes become opportunities to learn rather than reasons for punishment. This kindness nurtures emotional healing. Over time, gentle self-observation transforms the inner environment of the mind. Instead of becoming a battlefield of judgment and resistance, the mind becomes a place of understanding. Emotions appear, thoughts arise, experiences move through awareness, but they are held within a space of patience and compassion. And within that compassionate awareness, the mind begins discovering a quiet stability that no longer depends on perfection. It depends only on the willingness to observe life gently as it unfolds within. And as the practice of gentle self-observation begins softening the inner world, another discovery quietly appears. When the mind stops attacking itself, something unexpected happens. The noise inside slowly begins fading. The harsh inner commentary weakens. The urge to react to every thought or emotion becomes less intense. In that quiet space, a new form of strength begins emerging. Not the strength of argument, not the strength of proving something, but the strength of silence. There is a strange habit within the human mind. When emotions become unsettled, the instinct is often to speak more. The mind believes that explaining, defending, or correcting the situation will immediately restore peace. Words begin rushing forward, arguments are built quickly, reactions appear faster than reflection, but very often the opposite happens. The more words are used during emotional turbulence, the stronger the turbulence becomes. Conversations escalate, misunderstandings multiply, voices become sharper. The original issue becomes buried beneath layers of emotional reaction. Instead of solving the disturbance, the noise surrounding the disturbance grows louder. Buddhist wisdom offers a very different approach. When emotional storms begin forming, silence often restores stability faster than argument. This silence is not avoidance. It is not passive withdrawal. It is a conscious pause that allows emotional movement to settle before responding. Silence creates space, and space allows clarity. Many people underestimate the power of quiet reflection. In modern life, the mind is surrounded by constant stimulation. Conversations, messages, opinions, and information appear without pause. The mind becomes accustomed to reacting instantly to everything that arises. But instant reaction rarely produces wisdom. Wisdom usually appears after the mind becomes still enough to observe what is truly happening. Silence allows this observation. When someone enters silence during emotional intensity, the body begins calming itself. The breath slows naturally. The heartbeat becomes steadier. Thoughts that were previously racing begin slowing down. This physical change creates mental change. Clarity begins returning. The mind sees the situation differently. A comment that felt offensive moments earlier may appear less threatening. A misunderstanding that seemed serious may reveal itself as minor. A reaction that felt necessary may now feel unnecessary. Silence creates this shift because it interrupts the automatic chain of reaction. Without silence, emotions often feed themselves through continuous expression. Anger produces words. Those words produce more anger. The cycle grows stronger, but silence breaks the cycle. Another important aspect of silence is listening. When the mind is busy defending its position, it cannot truly hear the other person. Words are filtered through emotional reactions. The mind prepares responses before the other person finishes speaking. But when silence appears, listening becomes possible. Listening reveals information that argument often hides. Sometimes the other person is not attacking, but expressing frustration. Sometimes the conflict is based on misunderstanding rather than intention. Sometimes both sides are simply trying to be heard. Silence allows the mind to recognize these possibilities. Another powerful effect of silence is emotional containment. Emotions naturally rise and fall like waves, but when the mind reacts instantly with speech or action, the emotional wave often grows larger. Silence allows the wave to complete its natural cycle. An angry reaction may feel overwhelming for a moment, but if the mind remains silent and observant, the intensity often fades quickly. This fading happens because emotions cannot maintain peak intensity indefinitely. They require constant reinforcement through thinking or reacting. Silence removes that reinforcement. The emotion passes. Another beautiful quality of silence is perspective. When the mind becomes quiet, the larger context of the situation becomes visible. During conflict, the mind often narrows its attention to the immediate issue. The other person becomes an enemy. The disagreement becomes the entire focus of awareness. But silence widens perception. The mind remembers that the relationship may be more important than the disagreement. It remembers that people sometimes speak harshly during moments of stress. It remembers that emotions change. This wider perspective softens emotional reactions. Another reason silence is powerful is that it prevents regret. Many words spoken during emotional intensity are later regretted. Anger may produce statements that wound others deeply. Frustration may lead to accusations that cannot be taken back. But silence protects the mind from creating additional problems while emotions are unsettled. Instead of reacting impulsively, the mind waits until clarity returns. This patience often prevents unnecessary damage. Silence also strengthens self-control. When someone learns to pause instead of reacting immediately, they gain mastery over their own responses. They are no longer controlled by the emotional atmosphere of the moment. They choose their actions deliberately. This ability creates quiet confidence. Another subtle effect of silence involves dignity. When someone refuses to engage in unnecessary argument, they maintain their inner composure. They do not allow emotional chaos to pull them into behavior that contradicts their values. Their silence communicates stability. Others may notice this calmness even without words. Another important dimension of silence is reflection. After emotional turbulence passes, silence allows the mind to examine the situation honestly. What triggered the reaction? What emotions appeared? What could be handled differently next time? This reflection transforms conflict into learning. Without silence, the mind moves too quickly from one reaction to the next. It never pauses long enough to understand itself. Silence also reconnects the mind with deeper awareness. Buddhist traditions often describe silence as a doorway into inner clarity. When external noise fades, the mind becomes more aware of subtle movements within. Thoughts become easier to observe. Emotions become easier to understand. The mind begins recognizing patterns that were previously hidden beneath constant activity. This recognition strengthens emotional wisdom. Another powerful benefit of silence is emotional independence. People often feel pressured to respond immediately to every situation. A message must be answered instantly. A criticism must be defended quickly. An opinion must be challenged without delay. But silence reminds the mind that immediate reaction is not always necessary. Time can be taken to respond thoughtfully. Not every situation requires instant resolution. This freedom reduces emotional pressure. Another aspect of silence involves humility. When someone pauses instead of arguing, they allow the possibility that their own perspective may be incomplete. They remain open to understanding something new. This openness transforms conversations. Instead of competing for victory, people begin exploring understanding. Another quiet strength appears when silence becomes comfortable. Many people fear silence because it feels uncertain. They fill the silence with words to avoid discomfort. But when the mind learns to rest peacefully in quiet moments, silence becomes nourishing. It restores emotional balance, it clears mental clutter, it reconnects awareness with the present moment. This restorative quality of silence has been recognized in Buddhist meditation for centuries. Monastic traditions often emphasize periods of quiet reflection, not as punishment, but as nourishment for the mind. In silence, the mind remembers its natural calm. Over time, the practice of silence becomes a powerful tool for maintaining inner stability. When conflict appears, the mind does not rush to react. When emotions rise, the mind allows them to settle. When confusion appears, silence provides the space needed for clarity. Life continues, presenting moments of noise, disagreement, and emotional turbulence. But a mind that understands the strength of silence remains grounded, because it knows that stillness often resolves what argument cannot. And within that stillness, the deeper calm of awareness quietly returns. Life will always test the mind. Storms will arrive in the form of uncertainty, misunderstanding, conflict, loss, and change. But as these lessons have revealed, stability is not something that depends on controlling the outside world. It grows quietly from within. When the mind learns to anchor itself beyond praise and blame, beyond success and failure, it stops being thrown around by every passing wind. Inner stability begins the moment awareness stops reacting blindly and starts observing calmly. When emotions are allowed to rise and pass without ownership, when thoughts are watched instead of believed, when silence replaces argument, and when compassion replaces judgment, the mind becomes stronger than the circumstances surrounding it. Life may still bring chaos, people may misunderstand, situations may change without warning. But the mind that has learned these teachings becomes like bamboo during a storm, flexible, grounded, and impossible to break. And that is the quiet power of Buddhist wisdom, not escaping life's tests, but remaining unshaken while they happen. If one of these lessons spoke to you tonight, share it in the comments. Which idea stayed with you the most? Sometimes the insight that helps one person can become the turning point for someone else reading it. And if you want more teachings like this, lessons that calm the mind, strengthen the spirit, and bring clarity to everyday life, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next journey into wisdom. Rest well. The mind is learning to become still.